Perfect. Hey, everybody. My name is Jeff Butler. I was the producer of EverQuest for a period of time back in its heyday, and I left Sony Online Entertainment shortly thereafter to found Sigil Games Online with my then partner, Brad McQuaid, to make Vanguard Saga of Heroes. We ended up getting bought back by Sony Online Entertainment, and fast forward many years, I ended up working on EverQuest Next, which unfortunately never saw the light of day. Which not a day goes by that I don't regret seeing how successful that game could have been.
Yeah, it's
That's the short
interesting. That's a very nice, concise one, man. I wish I had that ability. we
it could go on. It could go on forever. I give you all the details, and if anyone has questions, I mean, we can go into all those details. But that's the short version, right? The big ticket items.
Yeah. We had Ryan Barker on again last night, and a little bit of discussion about EQ Next, and that was when he mentioned he was like, it still kind of sits with him. He's the potential of that thing, and wishing that it had come to fruition, even without him, you know. So
Yeah, we had some amazing things in progress. The tech was untested and untried. It was something completely unique, right? A completely uh, destructible, editable, voxel-based world, right? In a
mm,
massively multiplayer game. Even today, years later, no one's ever attempted to do anything like it, right? Um, not in actual detail, not using just little square anything beyond little square voxels.
yeah.
Um, but the tech that we worked on continued on. Voxel Farm kept working, and their work looks really good. EverQuest Next would have been a spectacular game, and it would have looked amazing.
So you know what? Zoidberg already has a question, so let's ask it, and then I'm going to go back to basically the beginning because I have questions about you just arriving on the team and everything. But Zoidberg's question was EQ Next cancellation due to the press release, in quotes, because it wasn't fun, or was there more to it?
Man, there was definitely more to it. So what happened with EQ Next? I can't pin down for absolute certain, right? Because I had left the company already. Um, my my feeling is that kind of having been the driving force behind EQ Next, once I left, there was no one there to push.
Hmm.
No one at the highest level, right? Who had the game as you know something that they wanted to see happen. Dave Georgeson was gone. I was gone, and so basically the game left with us. That's how I would summarize it.
Yeah, it's helpful to have a shepherd. If a project doesn't have somebody that's operating at the executive level or can represent the team in that level in a certain way, then it definitely becomes difficult. Um,
Yeah, you really need an evangelist, in
yeah.
my opinion, right? Someone who ties it all together, acts as the circuit breaker, can go back to the highest management and say, look, we still believe that we have a product that can be amazingly successful. We just need continued support. Um, that iteration of EverQuest had only been worked on for a fairly short period of time. The previous iterations, of which they're almost impossible to count. I think they went through maybe seven, seven subsets of what was going to be the next EverQuest. They'd work on it for a little while, scrap it, build it up again, scrap it, over and over and over again over the course of about 7 years
What was
before.
the what was the what was the hurdle that kept hitting? Like when that happens, at least in my experience, there's something there's something that somebody's looking for, and either you couldn't find it or
The biggest hurdle up until EverQuest Next, the design that I brought to SOE was revealed. The biggest hurdle for them was having somebody who knew what game they wanted to play, right?
Yeah.
From the outset, right? To have a creative director, a producer, a game director, you apply the name of the person, right? Because in some companies it's a different named person, right? Who
Mhm.
steps forward and says, you know, to the board or to their peers, I know what game the players are going to enjoy playing in 4 years' time. Let me describe it to you, right? First, I'm going to paint a verbal picture because we don't have a game. It's just a pitch, right? You need someone who can do that uh, credibly and excite people throughout the entire process, right? Because at first, it's just words,
Yeah.
right? It's just one guy or five people, a girl, someone with an idea, right? To sit down in front of the company management or the board of directors and say, this is the game that we should make, right? Uh, Sony Online Entertainment has a flagship product. It's paid the bills for the last 15 years. It's called EverQuest, and its related franchise components. And this game will be its successor, but it'll be larger than the original game. It'll be more successful. It kind of combines a bunch of things from other genres, other types of games, exactly like EverQuest did when it launched, right? In a perfect storm, in other words. And that was our goal.
Right.
And that's really what we were driving toward.
It,
And without somebody like myself or Dave Georgeson, Dave wasn't the originator of EverQuest Next, but he did a great job of picking up the idea, making it his own, falling in love with it, and running with it.
yeah, it's interesting. I've noticed, and I don't know if this is at all companies, but I've noticed at a few companies that I've been at, and in talking to some of my peers at other companies more recently, there's I've heard the mantra, especially from people that I've worked with at the high levels in companies who have come from outside of games, and so they've got a different role in the organization or whatever. The you don't make games for yourselves, right? And it's like, okay, I understand where you're going with it, but no, you don't make games for yourselves. You've got to. We need to get, and it devolves into this like market research survey, what's hip, blah 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 thing, which inevitably the people telling everybody you don't make games for yourselves often have a lot of opinions about games as well. And it's just like, and what I think that usually comes down to is if the company's small enough, then inherently there's somebody that's going to be the vision holder or somebody that's driving it, and people go along with it because it's a small company, of course. At bigger companies, it really takes a certain individual that's got a certain amount of political capital and can really manipulate things in a way to be able to maintain that type of a vision. And if it doesn't happen, at least in my experience, I could be wrong, then it devolves into this situation where it's reset after reset and chasing the latest fad and all of that stuff. So it's interesting to hear that.
I think your observation is absolutely correct. The scenario that you lay out was pre EverQuest Next, right? Where, as you say, it's about here's the latest market research. When you work on a massively multiplayer game over the course of 4 years, the market changes, right? I mean, nothing is static for 4 years,
Mhm.
right? So if you're relying solely on market research or the various trends, what's going on, what tech is being used, what art style is being used in the latest most popular game that came out, you're going to be chasing that for 20 years. You're
Yeah.
never going to catch up, right? I mean, look. I mean, you've worked on a massively multiplayer game. You know what I'm talking about. It's a massive undertaking, and it's an undertaking in every discipline that goes so far beyond building, let's say a single player game or a mobile game in terms of its scope and scale, the number of assets, the number of people that have to be managed, everyone pouring their efforts and the fruit of their labor into one gigantic crucible, right? That has to be demonstrable almost all the time. It has to be playable almost all the time. It's just a crazy undertaking in terms of complexity, right?
Which is saying something when you look at the just kind of batshit crazy complexity and scale of even single player games these days. Though most things seem to try, they're going beyond that. So
Right. Look at Cyberpunk, right? I mean,
yeah,
can you
exactly.
can you if you and I were working on Cyberpunk, building that game into an MMO, right? While everything else was going on,
You
right?
know how
We
many
received.
years I tried to get a Cyberpunk MMO made at Sony, and every time I was told nobody's into Cyberpunk, it's too niche and nerdy. But
Yep.
that's my I'm gonna ride that little horse into the grave. Um,
No, I hear you. I've heard the same exact thing. It goes right back to the original days of EverQuest, right? Before the game launched, people don't realize the team thought that they were going to have 75,000 customers. Did you know that?
yeah, so I've heard everywhere between 30 and 90. 75 makes sense. I think I heard 60 the most, but yeah, 75,000 customers for a year, right?
70, 75 was the target, right? So when guys like Russell Shanks and John Smedley were in those final days before the servers were lit up and people started to roll in on launch day, they assumed that there were going to be somewhere around 75,000 people, right? And there were more than that the very first day.
Well, and it's interesting on that theme. I remember we had dinner with Mark Kerr and some of the guys from WoW, and before it came out, and they were like, I swear I remember the comment, man, wonder what we're gonna do if we have 1 million customers. Like, how are we gonna handle that? On the tech side, blah blah blah. Is
Yeah, it rolls right into the conversation about World of Warcraft, right? So as EverQuest became successful, and I built the pitch and the game design for Star Trek Online, and we went up to Activision and pitched Star Trek Online. Um, at the time, I remember sitting in front of all the execs at Activision, and they said, according to our market research, we feel that depending on the intellectual property, right, if there were massively multiplayer games for a lot of the big intellectual property, like the comic intellectual properties, the big sci-fi names,
mm,
Star Trek, Star Wars, that there could be 1 million people who would play massively multiplayer games, but no more.
yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. I remember there being like that sort of sentiment, like that would tap out the market,
Yeah,
and
oh,
everything's
totally.
cannibalization from that point forward.
Precisely the case. Everything's cannibalization. And don't tell me, don't talk to me, don't try to represent that there could possibly be more than 1 million people who would play a massively multiplayer game. It's ludicrous, right? It's
Mm.
a ludicrous position. That's how people reacted during that period of time. And I just shake my head and I'm like, you just don't understand. You just don't know how many people are going to play the game that shows up with a low barrier to entry, that's friendly, that doesn't kick its customer in the nuts 15 times during the time that you're logged in, you know that that brings that community together, and gives them a place to play in a virtual world, right? That shared user experience. I was like, 1 million people. It's that's a spit in the bucket to the number of people who are going to show up, and eventually we're going to see again. There's going to be another huge leap forward when somebody comes out with the latest tech. Uh, you know, we think about games like Sword Art Online, right? A fictional game, right? But when Sword Art Online shows up, there's going to be a lot more than 15 million people playing it.
Yeah, it's interesting because during that period as well. First of all, I was from the moment I logged into EverQuest, every one of my William Gibson cyberpunk fantasies was sitting in front of me, and I immediately yelled for my girlfriend at the time to come in and look. I was like, "Those are people. Like this is about to get crazy." And
Yep.
I assumed it would be crazier faster. You know, it's taken 20 years for us to kind of get to the point that we're at, but it was reinforced when I was talking to my grandmother and trying to explain to her what I did for a living pretty early on. And then she was like, "Oh, so kind of like Club Pogo." She was playing Club Pogo where she would play like card games with her friends and buy them little virtual Christmas cards with her points that she got and all of this stuff. And I was looking at it, I was like, all right, so my grandmother's basically playing an MMO. And then as Xbox Live was becoming a thing, I looked at it and it's like, all right, as soon as you got point systems and all of this stuff, that's essentially an MMO. And we've just kind of seen with the advent of social media and everything else, everything is moving in this direction, and I don't see it stopping.
I don't see it stopping either. I mean, on the farthest end of the spectrum, away from the conversation that we're having, is the idea that you know there may be entire societies that have moved into virtual environments, right? A very high sci-fi concept, but it's explored in literature all the time. There's an entire genre, lit RPG, where it's a common trope that all of society has been moved into a virtual reality, right?
Well, and yeah, not. I don't want to take us too far sideways. Oh, my puppy's climbing up here. Apologies if you hear him whining in the background. Mom went to a dinner and he's been whining ever since. Um, the thing that I've noticed, we've seen it. We've seen all of the dystopian sort of tropes start to come to fruition last year with people being home from COVID. And my thought is the moment we somehow justify universal basic income and people just being paid to stay home, we finally hit one of the key elements from all of the old cyberpunk tropes where it's like people stay home and jack in, right? It's Netflix and MMOs basically. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this goes. That was one of my thoughts. No bullshit. Even back when I was working in customer service, I would talk to people about one of these days there's going to be some reason why people don't they do nothing but play MMOs for a living. And
Yeah.
and I would rather be the person making the MMO in that dystopia than the
Same.
one sitting at home only playing. No offense to you folks that may only play. It's still awesome, but I absolutely wanted to be a part of, whatever was going on the other side in that scenario.
Yeah, that's true. Belfast brought up a very good point about EQ's barrier to entry, right? Um, Back then, the number of people who had like a Voodoo 1 or a Voodoo 2 card, that was a small sliver of gaming's population at the time. That's one of the reasons. If you were to go back and grab John Smedley and sit him down in a chair and force him to, you know, go back mentally to those days, one of the reasons why they believed that there would be so few people was the simple limitation of hardware, right?
Sure.
They were like, people aren't going to go out and spend $2,000 to be able to play this game.
And it was so funny. I mean, working in CS, we'd get petitions from people we'd have to explain the basics of, is your computer on to them because they had bought their gateway or whatever, and video card and everything else, modem upgrade, just to play EQ. Like it was one of those things where it's like, can I email you? Oh, you don't? Here, we'll help you set up an email account. So
You've heard the stories, I'm sure, about the times during and around EQ's launch where we actually had to have people bring their computers in, right?
Hmm.
People with a weird AMD setup or some unusual video card, we'd have to ask the guy to drive down from Irvine with his machine and and actually sit down and start tearing it apart and try to figure out what was wrong with it. Back when customer service was just getting started, we had all these old machines that had been cobbled together from EQ developers over the years, and some of them could barely run the game. You could just log in as a GM and chat with players. You couldn't actually zone, right?
Hmm.
You couldn't go to certain places. You just had to sit in the little cat room and stare at the wall.
Yeah. Yeah, it was amazing what some people went through just to play, especially at the high end rating and things like that. My guild leader would have to he would frequently buy video cards or other components for key members of our guild. It's just like it was such a wild time. So since we're back in CS, your origins were there, right?
They certainly were. Yeah. The way I got involved in EverQuest was kind of becoming known to the guys on the development team because for a period of time I was the highest level player in the game. Right.
Mm.
Uh, During beta, I was playing an average of 14 to 16 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Did you have you had a comic shop or something then, or what?
A comic book store, collectibles, games, and cyber cafe. And we were mostly known for like Magic the Gathering tournaments and stuff like that.
Mm.
And a lot of the people in the industry, like Rich Vogel, some of the people who work at Gearbox now, used to come and play in my tournaments, right? Magic tournaments at my
Mm-hmm.
store. So there was always people playing like Warhammer 40K, board games, things of that nature. And we were crazy fortunate because in Tampa, Florida at the time, it was the it was the test bed for Time Warner Roadrunner, right? So fiber optic cable modems were just coming into their own, right? And they put a cable modem in my store to test at my cyber cafe, and they put one in my home. So when EQ started in beta, I just put on my application that I could download the game every day because I've got a fiber optic cable modem. Andy Seitz called me on the phone directly, like 2 days after I submitted my application, and gave me a quick interview and said, "Hey, let's get you into the beta straight away." So I was one of the first 32 people let into beta, and that was the beginning, right? I was the first player to 20. I was the first player to 30 in the world, and then I was the fourth guide. But I was the first guide that was not part of a little clique of guild mates.
Hmm.
And I said, look, being a volunteer guide can't just be a gentleman's agreement and a handshake between these people and the company. So there have to be rules, right? You can't, otherwise, you risk problems for the company because it's against the law to volunteer for a for-profit company, right? You can't just work for a company that makes a profit, right? That's This is the United States, and you can get in a lot of trouble doing that,
Yeah.
right? And I said, I'm sure, then Red Eye Variant Interactive doesn't want to be 2 years down the road and have a cadre of 1,000, volunteer guides turn around and say, hey, we would like to be paid wages for all the time that we've invested as volunteer guides in your game.
Yeah, it's one
So
of those things. It comes up a lot because we've started working on a game as well as a result of hanging out in the stream and meeting some cool people and talking about what we'd like to, what we'd like to see sort of recreated from back in the day that's maybe been lost in translation. And we have a lot of people that are super cool and want to help out and want to volunteer their time or resources and stuff. And it's one of those things where I'm like, after sort of learning from the stories of those discussions about the guide program and some of the things that came up over the years. Like,
Yeah.
we really need to tackle this a different way because, we are taking, just like you said, we're taking this seriously. It is for profit. It's going to be a thing one day. And I would hate then stuff to sort of reemerge a couple of years later.
Well, yeah, it exploded for Origin back when they were working on
Oh, yeah,
Ultima
that's right.
Online. They were scheduling people, right? They were telling volunteer guides when they needed to be online, so on and so forth. And
Mm,
that's one of many criteria that can create a condition of employment, right?
hmm.
And if those conditions, if enough conditions of employment exist, then the company owes you money for
Right.
for your for your wages, right? So we had to be really careful about that stuff. Had to get the guide program off to the right start. Make sure that there were rules that people had to follow, and that there were consequences for misdeeds, things of that nature.
Right.
And so in playing the game, being the highest level player for a period of time, and getting the guide program rolling, I ended up coming to the attention of a bunch of the guys on the dev team, like Kevin McPherson.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And when they needed somebody to actually launch their CS, they asked someone who I'd brought into the guide program, and that person said, "Oh, I would never consider doing that. You need to get Jeff anyway because he's the one who, you know, basically brought me into the guide program."
Right on.
And next thing you know, for a week, I think a week or 2 weeks, I was the EQ lead GM. Then I became the customer service manager. The guy
How big was CS then?
CS was on my first day, I would say probably eight or nine people. Yeah, just a handful. Steve George, Chris Trishell, I think. Just a couple of other GMs, Marlon Barraquillo,
Yep.
couple guys whose names escape me, a gentleman by the name of Jeremy. What these guys had been doing up until that point was double duty as like tech support, beta email support, and occasionally one or two of them would be assigned to log into the game and help beta testers, right? So they had a little cadre of guys who were doing that work, and they needed to get a T1 set up for phone lines for people to call in for tech support and problems in the game, report harassment, all that sort of other stuff. They needed uh, the guide program connected and able to read petitions and things of that nature to help out at a lower level
Hmm.
than GM, and they needed a lot of people hired. So I ended up hiring a bunch of customers of mine who had worked at my store or who had played in my Magic tournaments, who were avid gamers, and a lot of them moved out to California and became the first GMs.
Yeah, and then that crew also went from being the first GMs to some of the first developers that I knew of.
Correct. They
On
became like the early EQ Live guys. You know, some of them ended up, yeah. Some of those guys are industry executives now,
Yeah,
VPs at Funcom. You name it. They're all over the place. They founded their own companies, became CEOs. You name it.
yeah, it's
Crazy.
the crazy evolution. But yeah, a number of the people that have been on here basically had that path, right, and myself included. And so it's i- on that theme. And we can always come back to fun CS stories whenever you think of them. But so then you went from customer service. I saw you listed as co-producer on Kunark, and so was that when you moved into a new role, or what was the evolution like?
So what ended up happening was shortly after being customer service manager, it became obvious that uh, that Variant, Sony Online Entertainment, had more things going on. Right, they were trying to make other games. There was a game in development. I think it was called Exodus at the time, which became the core of Star Wars Galaxies. There was Sovereign, the MMORTS that was in development, and the people
Yep.
on the EverQuest team. I'll just say it. They'd been burnt, right? They'd been fried, right? I mean, these guys were living under. Some of them were living under their desks for 3 months before the game launched, right? And that's not an exaggeration,
No, not at
right?
all.
Yeah, I mean, you would walk into somebody's cube and you would trip on their sleeping bag, right? And some people hadn't seen their kids for days, right? And they're like, "Hey, I need to go home this afternoon and take a shower because it's been 3 days since I've been able to take a shower."
Yeah.
Stuff like that. So the EQ team had been burned to a crisp, particularly some of the big contributors. People don't realize guys like Ryan Palacio, who who did a vast amount of world population. I mean, he's the guy who put the loot on the monsters in the dungeon and put named monsters or unique monsters into the dungeon population. Otherwise, you would have seen things like, a dark elf walking around Najana all the time
Right.
instead of an ogre captain, instead of Drelsna, right? And there wouldn't be any unique loot. So those guys stayed, for the last several months of EQ development, they stayed, 24/7 trying to get data into the database so that players would actually have a more content-filled game to participate in. And it became obvious that those people were not going to be able to be tapped to continue to make additional content. Some of them were burned out. Some of them had quit before the game had launched, right? There was a lot of turnover because
Mm.
people were. It became obvious that we needed a staff that could continue to work on the game. And there didn't seem to be any better pool of people to draw from than than the people who not only wanted to get into the games industry, but were super invested in the game, who had been players in beta, and those were the GMs, right? So I sat down with John and Brad and said, "Hey, why don't we make use of the remaining developers that we have? Uh, we'll pick the hardest working, the brightest game masters, and we'll apprentice them to the developers,
Hmm.
right? Give me something like 10 hours of overtime a week, right? For a cadre of guys, we'll cycle, let's say, 2, 4, 6 in at a time to apprentice to the developers to learn how to make content in the game. And the very first guy who hit was a gentleman by the name of Jason Polk. He had
Hmm.
sat he had sat down with the guys working on the database, and he engineered SplitPaw. You remember when SplitPaw got updated? And
I
there were,
I know of at least one update. I don't know if there was one prior to the one I'm thinking of.
the crazy SplitPaw update was the one where, like, the Knoll sergeant and the Knoll captain were out in front of SplitPaw, streaking commands to the individual Knolls, right? And like Knoll battalions would form up and whatnot. When Jason had laid all that stuff out, he brought me over. He did it at his desk in CS after he would log off during his GM hours. He showed it to me. It was amazing, even in the first iteration. So I went and got Brad. Brad was shocked. He drugged Jason away. Uh, Jason, and Smed then showed up for a demonstration, and literally 15 minutes later, Jason was the first EQ Live team member. They formed the EQ Live team. He was the very first member, and that was the business model going forward.
Mm.
Um, the individual GMs apprenticed, right? They expressed their interest. They were moved into the apprentice program. If they did well, They ended up becoming associate game designers on EQ Live. Uh, that went on for a couple of months. The other thing that was huge about my transition from customer service to being EQ producer were all the bugs in the game, right? Um, you guys will clearly remember things like corpses disappearing, right? Like, hey, I died. Where did my corpse go? Oh yeah, it was sitting right there, and then it's just gone. I didn't give anyone permission to loot it. It just disappeared.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, players would report this stuff. There were times as a GM where I would physically see it, right? I would watch a corpse disappear. I would check the logs. I would see that no one looted it, right? Um, I was the person who would then go to the programmer and say, "Hey, Joe, uh, here it is in the logs. The corpse was deleted, right? I see this loot, and this loot didn't go anywhere,
Mm.
right? It was literally the server just said goodbye, right? I had to recreate all this guy's stuff, and we've got people being traumatized by this problem left and right. And he'd be like, "That's impossible. It's just impossible. Couldn't happen." And I was like, "No, it really did. I've done my homework." And I was like, I've got 4 other examples that I'll give you. Here they are. Well, long story short, the bugs started getting fixed, right? It took a
Yeah.
while. I literally had to establish a relationship with those guys on the dev team. I had to bring them the information they needed, right? I had to push them to get the bugs fixed. I had to have conversations with people like, "Hey, look, it's yes, it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon and you want to leave, but you can't leave because I've got 150,000 customers who rely on you to fix this problem, right?
Right.
It has to be fixed, right? We're doing a patch 3 days from now. This has to be in that patch, right?" And so next thing you know, John came in and said, "Hey, I want you to take over as producer of EverQuest. So you're going to be in charge of the EQ Live team,
Right.
and I need you to I need you to get Kunark out the door. So we've got all these zones that need to be populated. Get it done."
So
And there you go.
it's interesting. It's funny you mentioned some of those bugs, and it gave me little flashbacks to being in customer service. Because there would be those things where you look in the logs, and you had to. It was this process of elimination. It was like, okay, I do see a corpse. I don't see that anybody's looted the corpse, and I see when you died. So the corpse should still exist, but it doesn't exist. And
Yep.
well, I guess that's one of those situations where I have to go back and recreate essentially all of your items for you. Sorry this happened to you, kind of thing. So yeah,
Precise.
it was helpful to spend the time in customer service before getting on the team, because I think for a lot of us, we still had a lot of that pain fresh. So
Yep.
it was more, it was more of a thing where it was, not to say it wasn't important to the original team members, but I do think when you're dealing with it every day, you maintain a perspective of like, well, it may not seem like a big deal and we've got other stuff to do and there's never ending pile of things to get done. I understand that, but this is going to continue to generate thousands of tickets, which is wasting people's time.
It's such a huge issue. It's one component of the massive complexity of massively multiplayer games that is all too often overlooked, right? We're not just making a game, right? We're creating a service, right? So each component in that creation process becomes responsible for the maintenance of the service, right? From the Milo Cooper, who is an artist, a programmer, and an animator, right? If Milo Cooper creates the exporter for the player characters, and Milo Cooper moves on, right, in his career, maybe he moves on to another company, but he certainly moves on to a different position within the company. But if he's the one who coded the exporter and he's the only one who ever used it, then every time an issue comes up with the exporter, Milo is back on, he's back on deck, right? Milo, we have a service running. We now have 300,000 customers, right? And they rely on, well, they rely on you, right, to help me get this model fixed so that it can be patched. In this upcoming Shadows of Luclin fix, or whatever the case may be, right? And what you had in the EverQuest development team, in a lot of cases, were they were not experienced MMO devs because there was only one real MMO at the time, right? And none of these people came from working on that MMO. They were all fresh, right? Some people, it was their very first job or their second job, or previously they had worked as a DBA for a lawnmower company, right? And things like that. They didn't have service in their minds, right? They didn't realize that, yeah, you may be working on EQ2, whoever you are, but I need to pull you back to work on EverQuest, even for a week, right? I need you to redo this, right? So it's no longer buggy.
Yeah, it's funny. The I've come on, so not only worked on MMOs, so I've worked on EQ after it was live, worked on DC from sort of the beginning on, and then I've come into a couple of companies where the MMOs have been around for 6, 7, 8 years or whatever. I'm the 13th producer or something. And that thing you're describing of this guy who worked on this thing and was the only one that knew how all of the duct tape and chicken wire kept things together, has long moved on. And so not only do we need to fix that immediately, we need to figure out how the hell it even works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, when Milo when Milo came to work at Sigil, we knew that they weren't going to be able to put characters in the game anymore, right? That they were going to have to rewrite that exporter, right?
Yeah.
That piece of software that he had created. These situations form nightmare scenarios for companies that are developing MMOs for the first time, right? To have to relearn all these little pitfalls. We're going over the very highest level of those things.
Yeah. And
But
as you mentioned at the time, it's a challenge for big companies that have all the resources in the world today to be the first company establishing those standards or just running into that logic for the first time of like, oh yeah, shit, if this thing's going to be around for more than a year or 2 years or whatever, we've got to
20
develop this. Yeah. Over
Right. I
20
mean,
years.
look at EQ, right? It's been around for over 20 years. Ultima Online, over 20 years. Look at the trajectory of, I last year when John Donham was the number two guy at Blizzard Activision, I sat down to talk with him about WoW Classic,
Right.
and you can imagine the problems that they went through launching WoW Classic when literally, like we found when we were working on the EQ Classic servers, right? That code doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
Right. So what was the EXP curve for a ranger at launch, or during beta? Yeah, nobody has that information, right? That's gone,
Yep.
right? So it wasn't saved, right? We just have to guess.
Assets are missing, code is gone, data has been overwritten a long time ago. It's
Yeah,
yeah, and it's not unique to EQ as there were some nice talks and stuff on the creation of WoW Classic that kind of hit on that.
yeah.
So I have a question that I don't want to forget. You were describing the sort of just the burn to get EQ launched, and then the challenges then that you've got to step in as a producer, and you've got to find that balance of not creating that problem all over again while also providing. I'm sorry, my dog is climbing over me right
Oh, no,
now.
no. That
But he
is
is
a
cute.
super cute puppy.
Thanks. Oh, I'm gonna put you down. You can keep. So but yeah, you've got a live game with 150,000 and then 300 and then 450,000 people, you know, that have expectations for the service, rightfully so. And we're trying to balance that against also having people live at work. What was, did you see a change from launch to Kunark, and was that an ongoing evolution? And what lessons did you kind of learn?
The hardest thing was was the fact that a lot of people on the original team had been burned by that horrible crunch. Some of the most resilient people, the people who were happy-go-lucky, always smiling, you could never put down, right? Jeff Zatkin, a great example, right? Jeff Zatkin, I never heard a cross word or a nasty eye. I saw a nasty eye squint or exasperation from that guy in the entire time that I not only worked with him but saw him working. He was just unflappable, right? Nothing ever got to him, it seemed. With all the crazy hours and stuff, I could always go to him. He would drop whatever he was doing, and he was always there. He was the spell guy initially, right? So you
Right.
can imagine the number of bugs and the amount of input that actually cycled through that guy. I mean, it was like a river, right, of stuff that he had to constantly deal with, right? Because he was also responsible for all those balance issues, right? It wasn't just fixing the bugs, it's just maintaining balance.
Yeah, yeah,
Jeff was an example on one end of the spectrum. On the other, there were people who were ready to quit, or who did quit, right? Who exited the company, whose work had to be picked up, sifted through, and figured out, right? And people who were transitioning to other roles where they literally couldn't be bothered because they were swamped with other work, right? Some of the key programmers that was true of, where I would literally have to go in and and expend non-existent personal capital with someone who I barely knew to get them to look at something that they had not touched for 14 months.
right.
Right? I need you to go in. I need you to go into the graphics code and find out why we can't make a weapon with a particle effect on it, right? Things of that nature. There are people in the industry today who literally got their chance as a game developer because they said that they were willing to go into somebody else's work, sight unseen, and figure out how it was done. The Todd Schmidt is a great example. Todd Schmidt became an associate programmer, and the one of the very first significant things that Todd did was to dig into uh, a gentleman's 3D graphics code uh, who had left the team, who put the flame on the flaming sword and the fire on the torch, the fire particle on the torch.
Yeah.
Todd Schmidt, reverse engineered all that stuff and figured out how to make particle effects on weapons and other things. That's how he became a game developer.
He's a he's a beast. We've been fortunate enough to have him on here a few times and have him hang out in the Discord and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Hobart is a legend.
it's one of those things. Hobart was a GM, right? He had just started to apprentice. He heard my lamentation. He heard the member of the team's lamentations about not being able to do this. We were like, we want to make these awesome class weapons, and they won't be awesome unless they have particle effects. But we went and we talked to the ex programmers who were still attached to the team loosely, right? Who were working most of the time on EQ2, and we were like, "Can you help us with the particle effects?" And they were like, "Door slam, literally, get
Yeah,
out of here."
I'm gonna ask some questions about slamming doors and stuff later. We'll get into some of that because I remember a lot of door slams, chair flying, all sorts of
Oh,
stuff in those environments back in the day. The
those are conversations.
Yeah, it was a different time. It's
It was.
so it's interesting. There was a question earlier. I'm gonna skip ahead to something so I don't forget it, but then we'll come back and maybe talk a little bit more specifically about recollections from from the Kunark and Velious and Luclin era. I was in customer service, but I was apprenticing. I started as an apprentice to an apprentice unofficially, and then became a 10-hour-a-week apprentice. And I remember I was still in one of the CS pits. So it's interesting to think of when this was timing wise exactly. But I was still in one of the CS pits when you appeared with Kaposi, if I remember correctly. And
Mhm.
somebody, I think Sigil, was asking if Kaposi had come from one of the, if he came through CS as well. I don't remember. I thought he came from, he had a website. But
So Kaposi was Kendrick,
yep.
right? And he's one of the few people who didn't appear on the development team through CS. Two guys actually, they came on board at the same time, John Kaposi and Bill Fisher.
Hmm. Yeah.
So we decided to kind of experiment and take two avid players who were both involved and outspoken, very knowledgeable about the game, and bring them onto the development team. They kind of started as apprentices. At that point, they became associate game developers just to see if we could bring people from the outside because we were having problems staffing up.
Mm-hmm. And wasn't he was from the safe house, or do you
Um,
remember?
yeah, he was one of the first 32 people in beta. Like myself, um, he he was one of those first people allowed into the gate to play in beta,
Mm.
and he ended up, posting avidly on the Safe House. He was an advocate of a certain style of gameplay. He was more of a soloer, right? He wasn't a guild leader. He wasn't really a guild participant. He loved the genre in the game, but he was more about content for the individual player. Whereas Bill Fisher was the opposite end of the spectrum. He came from Fires of Heaven,
Yeah. Yep.
right?
Yeah.
He was a minor. He was one of the more minor guys in Fires of Heaven.
Yep. Yep. And we've been fortunate to have him on as well. Yeah, it's funny, like just how everybody came together. So the story that I was thinking of was the waking of the warders, and you guys appeared in the customer service pit because, and now memories are different. Memories have different recollections of what went down there. So I'm curious, do you remember, can you give us your take on what happened when the sleeper was woken?
So
The conquest story.
yeah, it's the conquest story, right? Um, my recollection, this is one of those stories where I really need a couple of beers, and I need the other people involved to
Fair
all be
enough.
present, right? To get all of the details, because it's one of those things where each person remembers what their own role in the story was,
Mm,
right? I can tell you, in summary, Conquest was using an exploit, and I mean there are exploits, right, that are minor, and there are exploits that are blatant, right? I can do something, like leash a mob at a zone border, right? A very minor exploit, right? Back in the day, right? Or I can stand up on the walls in the city of Kinos and as a necro, and I can dot all the guards and burn them down and get level 30 in an afternoon, right? And never get hit by any of the mobs, right? Let's say that's a more a clearer exploit, right?
right.
What Conquest was doing was the latter example, right? They were hiding under a piece of geometry. They put their healers under a piece of geometry where the warders could not hit them, so they could heal with impunity and never draw aggro, right? And they used that technique to get through the warders and attempt to awaken the sleeper. And not only did the people who were doing the exploit, uh, not only were they aware of it, but everyone else in the guild was aware of it as well because they were talking about it, right? Right. The GM was watching, right? We had a clear path of knowledge, right, and intent. And so I said, yeah, disband the guild, right? They're destroying this experience for the entire server of players. Now, I admit that for many of those people, the experience was aspirational, right? You know, how many of us, how many of the people on the server were ever going to be standing in front of the warders beating them down, right? A fraction of a fraction. I am well aware of that, right? Because we knew how many people were in those fights, right? How many guilds were able to actually participate in them. But I think it's a great example of the sort of responsibility that we have. It goes back to being a dungeon master, right? I look at running the service of a massively multiplayer game uh, as a macro version of the relationship between a player and a dungeon master in pen and paper gaming, right?
Yeah.
You, as a player, you give me, your dungeon master, the opportunity to entertain you for 4 hours on a Friday night, right? On Discord or face to face, pre COVID. I take that as a serious responsibility, right? If players don't like a certain style of game, right? If they don't like it to be too gritty or too bloody, or they don't like any sort of adult elements to be present, you take that into account as a dungeon master and you moderate your entertainment accordingly. Well, start with that and then move forward and say, well, what if I was the DM of 100,000 people?
Yeah, it's interesting because in asking the question, you know, I also I forgot like and I should know better because I forgot like the controversies and the back and forth and there was the, you know, exploiting summon at the Z axis and blah blah. I
You could,
I've got to figure a better way to frame this. On the other side, so conquest aside, the repercussions or whatever, the things that stuck out to me was the GM of the server that was having to deal with it suddenly has the producer of EverQuest in this game, this, you know, one of the designers, and in customer service we're scared shitless. We're like, man, we don't want to get on the wrong side of these guys. We want to make our way onto the design team one day. We don't want to screw up. And now all of a sudden the most high profile encounter in the entire game has some shit going on where it's like, okay, so we're watching this. Is it bad? Is it good? Are they exploiting? It looks like an exploit, but then again, I also come from like this school of thought of like, well, they're being creative. Good for those guys, you know? And so, but what I'm worried about is this particular GM, who's the sweetest guy in the world, is sitting there having to deal with his shit with you guys looming over him. And I'm just like, oh my God, don't get fired, dude. Don't get fired. Oh my God. And I remember something because it was like,
well, that
what
only
was
happened.
kill
That
kill the warder, right? I could have sworn because we had two commands. There was like /kill and there was like some other kill that wouldn't trigger any of the death events.
yeah, wouldn't leave a corpse.
So, and whatever happened, I could have sworn when it did happen, it was not the right thing.
Yeah, that could be that part. I don't remember. Uh, I don't recall. It could have been that the DM killed the warder with the wrong command. But you know, it's not like we didn't see the generation of loot and we weren't able to, you know, delete that loot
Oh,
wherever it
sure,
went.
sure. It was just the sequence of
So
events. It was like a Rube Goldberg machine of just like holy shit that night.
was the GM Andy? I think the GM was Andy, right?
Mm-mm. But the GM worked for Andy, so I think
Oh, okay.
Andy was the lead,
Yeah, Andy was his lead.
and I
So
think
it
Frisnick was
was
the GM.
yeah, it was Andy who had come to us. Because that's because I remember dealing initially with Andy, right? Because he came to us and said, "Hey, you know, are you guys watching the fight?" And one of the guys on the dev team was watching the fight. He was giving us an update, and we were talking about the nature of what was going on. It seemed clear that an exploit was in progress, but with an entire raid in the zone, you know how EverQuest is,
Mm.
particularly at the time, we didn't have, we didn't have a wide range of tools to determine exactly what was going on. I couldn't look at the warder's aggro table very easily, for instance, and see that he was, that he wanted to kill certain people that he couldn't reach,
Yeah.
right? So on and so forth. So we were trying to figure out what was going on. Our level of alarm was rising because they were successfully moving forward, but we felt that something was clearly wrong. And they were talking about exploits. Andy was monitoring the situation through his subordinate, right?
Mm.
I think not only was the GM listening in, but Andy was listening in to the GM,
Yeah.
right? So there were multiple layers of management looking at what was going on. And then finally, we figured out exactly what they were doing. We were like, oh, look, yeah, see these guys, they're complete healing. I remember one of them was a high elf male, right? He was right underneath the geometry. And I was like, that's it. I was like, so the warder can't see them. So they're just down there in a complete heal rotation, right? They've got 4 guys or 6 guys down there just doing their complete heal rotation, and they're doing so with impunity. I was like, oh yeah, okay. So if it weren't for the fact that we're talking about an encounter that once it's complete can never be done again, right? We can never get our primal Velium weapons ever again on the server. It's like,
Mm.
and these guys, they know what they're doing, and I hear what you're saying. They're without getting into that debate. There's a huge school of thought of, okay, if you've got an exploit and the company hasn't fixed it, isn't it isn't pursuing that exploit just my creativity, right? It's not easy. It's not, after all, it ain't easy to come up with this shit,
Like
right?
I do get the limits of it. Trust me, especially on that one. It's yeah. So, but
But the other side of that coin is certainly worth a valid discussion, right? But we chose as developers and as custodians of the game to try to intervene when necessary to make a better gameplay experience for everybody, right? We took responsibility and said, hey, you have to be nice to each other. You can't walk up and spout racial slurs at one another, right? You can't make a character named Cock in your mouth and walk around the game and go, I'll send you a tell, right?
oh,
Fun,
so much of
funny
my
man.
workday. You just described so much of my workday when I was in customer service.
I mean, I use the character name because that's a real character name, right? I watched a guy approve a name. I was standing over Scott McDaniel, who was an artist, and a name approval came by because unlike like World of Warcraft, we didn't have a bad name, really a good source of bad names. Every person who was logged into the game with development powers saw every character name request and either approved or denied it, right? And if somebody wasn't logged in, it would just go by and be accepted. So Stab You Ass came up, right? Some rogue named Stab You Ass, and I watched Scott McDaniel, the art director, click approve, and I was like, "Bro, you just approved Stab You Ass," and he was like, "No, the name is Stabouse," and I was like, "Dude, you need to sound that shit out, right? You need to sound that shit out." I said, "You can't just click on approve." I was like, "Now I have to go change Stab You Ass's name, right?"
Yeah.
And
Oh my god. It was funny because they would just pop up so frequently, and if you're doing something, sometimes you just click, and it'd be like you'd click it, and in that case, I could see it. Like I would be like, Stabouse. Oh, stab you ass. Oh, all right. Hold on 1 second, please. I've got to go deal with some dipshit. It's
exactly. Exactly. Just hilarious stories. GM Kata Veer, I'll never forget this. Somebody named their character Punk, right? And Joe Russo, GM Kata Veer, teleports to the guy and says, "Good afternoon, comma, Punk." He says, I'm GM Kata Veer. I'm very pleased to meet you today, comma, Punk. And then he waits, and we're all standing around his computer, and the guy's like, hello, and I'm sorry, comma, punk, but I'm going to have to ask you to pick a new name, comma, punk. And this goes on for just line after line after line where he does comma, punk, and the guy's like, you're you're being condescending to me. And he's like, I'm really not sure what you mean, comma, punk. Over and over till finally he changed the guy's name. That's one of my funniest name change stories.
Oh, you know, I wanted forever to rename Tiggle, and I
Yeah.
could never get permission to rename him.
Yep.
And now,
That name. Oh my god. Yeah. That was quite bothersome. That's that touches upon the same thing that ended up happening with Conquest, right? You get the the issue of someone who's appealing, in this case, appealing to Brad McQuaid, uh, uh, that they contribute a lot to the game, right? I contribute a lot to the game. I have a huge guild. We're big, advocates of the game, and we should get special permission to name our character about tits
yeah, yeah,
when any other player would be like, "What would you like for a new name, punk?"
exactly. Yeah, yeah. And as was mentioned in chat, and now I could, uh, yeah.
Yeah,
He 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 uh he could at least buy us a beer at this point. He could afford it.
he has bought. Yes, I
Oh,
have. I've had my beer purchased
it's
a
funny,
couple.
man. Like I love the fanfare so much because so many of the people when you meet them in real life are just awesome folks, no matter how big a pain in the ass they were on the other side of the screen. So
How true. Very true. I mean, I've hired people who were huge pains in the ass. The
well,
best example of that,
obviously
Jack Carlson.
you you hired me as well eventually at the end of Luclin.
You weren't a pain in the ass though.
Nah, I was a good guy.
Yeah, you were a good guy. There were many pains in the ass. You didn't even trip the pain
No,
in the ass meter once.
no. As a matter of fact, I was awesome. That's great. So on that note, Luclin. Let's
Shadows of
let's bring it back. So Luclin was an interesting project because it went quickly from when I was talking to folks, hey man, you're probably going to be apprentice forever because we don't have room on the team, and we're not going to need you, to really quickly within that period, because I wasn't in CS that long. Like, oh God, we need all hands on deck, and you're going to be one of the first ones coming up. Steve Burke went up, and I went up, and a few others, and then over time we started getting more and more people. Ryan and Paul and all those guys from CS came in. Luclin is an interesting one. The Since I've been streaming again, or streaming EQ starting last year, and we talked to folks, like the original, basically up through Velious, it's no brainer. People just love those expansions, right? Launch and Kunark and Velious. Luclin's where the bits of controversy start, and as someone that worked on Pop and other stuff after that, I've dealt with my fair share of questions about why we did X, Y, or Z. Luclin to me was interesting because it just felt like the ambition level went even farther than what was already a high degree of ambition, and it was a big expansion and was still probably a half or a third of what it was probably meant to be. So from day one, what happened there, and what can you give us sort of insight on?
Wow. So the first thing I'll say is that is that is maybe too big a question,
Oh yeah,
because
it's huge.
yeah, not that by any stretch of the imagination. I don't mind talking about it for an hour, right? It's no skin off my teeth. Um, However, there are so many working components of why Luclin was a struggle, um, that it's probably necessary to kind of boil it down a little bit.
Mm.
Um, the thing about Luclin to remember is that in some companies, you have, like we talked about earlier, you have market research, you have you have other departments, you have people pushing, um, you have disparate views and opinions about what things should be. Luclin was a really interesting monster because what had happened was the president of 989 Studios, who was a gentleman by the name of Kelly Flock,
Mm.
had he had spun EverQuest away from 989 Studios when Sony had said 989 Studios must focus on PlayStation games, right? This EverQuest game, which is going to be PC, is outside of your bailiwick. You don't have the ability to focus on all the stuff at once, so get rid of them, right? Get rid of those PC guys. 989 Studios spun EverQuest off. Kelly let John and Brad found their own company, right, to build up EverQuest. They found a different Sony partner in Sony Online Entertainment that was not related to the PlayStation side of Sony gaming in any way, shape, or form, right? And that was the EverQuest that we all knew and love, right? Well, that guy, Kelly Flock, had come back into the picture as the president of Sony Online Entertainment. And he wasn't a gamer, he wasn't an EverQuest player, but he had thrown a bunch of stuff into the mix that he wanted to see, right? He wanted to see mounts, right? He wanted the customer base to continue to expand, right?
Mm.
As we all did, right? So the pressure to make EverQuest a million player game was always there, right? That it had its strongest source in myself, guys like you, Brad, right? Brad didn't play EQ, but he certainly would like to see it be a million player game, right? So we didn't need pressure from Kelly to become a larger game, but mounts were beyond our ability to to execute competently. But Kelly wanted horses in the game. It's one of the few things that he had insisted on be present in the game at launch.
Oh,
And it's a
interesting.
oh yeah,
Because
but it's a
I always, for whatever
feature.
reason, I thought it was a reaction to the Daok sort of mounts on rails at the time, but it's interesting that it was one of those OG requests.
The strongest advocate for that was Kelly, who said, "Look, it's going to happen, right? You're going to do it." Now, that said, it wasn't onerous for us to be pressured that way because we wanted it to happen too, right? I wasn't, I wasn't miserable that that was something that had to be executed. I I actually demoed the game to Kelly in mid Shadows of Luclin, and he sat, he watched the demonstration, he listened to me, and at the end of it, he said, "What about the mounts? I was told that you would be demonstrating the mounts today." And I was like, "Oh yeah, yeah. Here, hold on." I had had a horse modeled, and I did a color print of the horse, and I cut it out, and I glued it to a ruler, and I lifted the ruler up in front of the screen and put it underneath my player character, and I said, "Here's how it'll work. Your character will get on the horse, and he will gallop across the screen." And I moved my character off the screen out of the camera. And I said, "What do you think?" He was like, "So that's not ready yet?" And I was like, "No, and it might not be." He was like, "Well, he was like, "It better be. Better be." He's like, "That's the one thing that I require of you." And I was like, "So, the fact that we're doing 3 extra zones, then than we were asked to do, and all this other stuff. We're revamping the player characters. Yeah, none of those things are on your radar. All you care about is mounts. I was like, yeah, you do know that the people who, like, let's say, wrote the exporter, they no longer work here, things of that nature, right? So it's really difficult to, like, animate a horse and stick the player character on it. Yeah, it's not easy to do, right? Given
Yeah.
given our cadre of associate programmers, Todd Schmidt's a great example. Ask Todd Schmidt about the mounts, right? Ask him about the people who were on the programming staff at the time. Some of whom who had only worked on EverQuest for 6 months,
Mm.
right? Not easy to pull that stuff off with a bunch of newbies. So
Yeah.
anyway, pressure from above was one aspect of Luclin, but the other significant thing was, um, there were there was a confluence of things going on with Luclin that were that contributed to not being able to pull things off. Right, all of these very ambitious goals, like revamping the player character models, right, like updating updating various aspects of the engine. Uh, there was no one on the EverQuest Live team who was able to promise that those things could be done, right? From a programming standpoint, from an art standpoint. Uh, when we sat down to plan EverQuest next, company management brought a bunch of people forward and said, these people are going to join the team to accomplish these tasks, right? People we hadn't worked with before, uh, people who either had worked in other positions at the company or who were new to the company.
Mm.
And um, universally, those people failed to accomplish their assigned tasks. So the guy who was supposed to rig and mob and assist us in getting a cadre of new player characters into the game imploded on us during the course of the development.
Yeah.
And when I say imploded, I mean things happened that I can't repeat to Twitch.
Mm.
I could tell you over a beer, but I can't tell the public.
Yeah, and I got, I at that point I was one of the guys that had been brought up and plopped in a cube with a more experienced person, or maybe it was I don't remember being in a cube. I got tossed in a room with Lawrence and Steve, but I was out and about enough to kind of see some of the stuff that was going on. There was a bit of that, and I caught a bit of that, and
Yeah.
we've had different people comment on that period on the stream, and I think people have been pretty good about being conscientious of uh, just sort of politely saying shit wasn't ideal, right? And so, and I definitely have some recollection of some less than ideal stuff going on in that area, and then a few others.
I don't want to impact people's ongoing careers.
Yeah.
Like some of these people, I don't even know where they work now, or in what capacity, even if they're still in the industry. But there were some implosions. Those implosions left us with um, huge hurdles to overcome, and the responsibility for overcoming those hurdles fell on guys like the animators, right?
Mm.
We had to pull every animator from every project at Sony Online Entertainment and put them on Shadows of Luclin to get the player characters out the door.
Mm.
Now, did you ever see the gnome male run animation?
I
As
do not remember it. No.
So it's one of those things, like during your period of time as an apprentice, I'm surprised you didn't hear us howling and laughing at the guy's monitor, because you remember the Naruto ninja run, right? Where you bend over at the waist and you put your arms behind your
Hmm.
back with your weapons extended back behind you, and you lean over and you run like a ninja, right? that was the run that the guy had come up with for the gnome mail. And as soon as he demonstrated it, we all just started cracking up laughing. And I was like, yeah, we're running out of time. It's true. And I really appreciate the fact that you're up here rather than working on Sovereign right now like you're supposed to be doing. But yeah, no, that that you need to redo that one. Someone actually asked a very interesting question earlier. Bit crunches. Uh, what was my view on Pantheon, and did I see similarities to the start of EQ? I give you a quick answer to that question. No, no similarities between the start of Pantheon and EQ, because Pantheon was more a volunteer-based project. They weren't backed by a publisher. EverQuest had the advantage of having been backed and funded by a publisher throughout its entire development process. And there's nothing whatsoever about that that is similar to how Pantheon was being developed, right? Crowdfunding and publisher sourced money are two totally different things. So yeah, no similarities. I feel sorry for the guys who are working on Pantheon, because it's much more difficult to succeed in that situation.
And you think that's because of just the expectations from the community and the pressures there, or is it because of the lack of consistency and sort of looking at this as our runway, or
Well, the thing is, it kind of boils down to matters of security, right?
yeah.
How it, I enjoyed working with you. And I've enjoyed talking to you today. I feel, based on my past experience with you and what I know you've been doing, that I would enjoy working with you in the future, for instance, right? But how do I recruit you to my team if I found a company to make, let's say, EverQuest Next 2.0, right, with a different name? How do I recruit you if I don't have uh, a solid, guaranteed source of funding where I can say, hey, Sean, let's collaborate together again. How much are you making? How much do you need to make? Um, you know, will you consider moving back to San Diego? Because if you do, I would be willing to pay you this much money every year to do so, right? The first question you ask is, okay, how are you funded, right? How do your milestones work? Uh, how can you guarantee me into this new startup company that I'm still going to be receiving a paycheck in 6 months, right? How do you describe to me how you have all that covered,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So if we can have that conversation, and I can prove to you that I've got all the bills covered and the publisher is on board, right? I've got so and so paying the bills, right? They're on board. We're good to go. Please join my company. Please consider, and let me know who else you might recommend for the various positions that I have open, so on and so forth. With that sort of surety, you've got stability, you've got security. Um, with a crowd-funded project, sometimes that doesn't exist.
Yeah, I was about to say, having that war chest and being able to provide that security makes life a lot easier in that situation. We're currently bootstrapping, and it's all about sweat equity and a hell of a lot of patience and a lot of passion. And
Wearing
Nick and
multiple.
Bunny and everybody, love you to death for it. But yeah, it's one of those thoughts that's constantly in the back of my mind of, yeah, if we were just sitting here on even just the seed to work through the proof of concept, it would be one of those things where it would be really nice to make. Bunny's like, "Where's my money, Sean?" It'd be nice to make people's lives a little bit easier, provide that, and then know that they can just focus on this. And so yeah,
Yeah.
it's definitely a big difference. Now on the flip side, then when you've got that investment and you've got, whether it be from a publisher or a single source or whatever, then it really becomes it doesn't have to be, but it's my belief that that's when you're looking at the challenges of establishing, maintaining the vision and ensuring that whoever you're partnered with really shares that vision so that you're able to execute on it and not have it turn into how do we close this payback window as quickly as possible and 10x my investment.
Yeah. Well, a good example with VC, for instance, if I were to ever be involved in uh, starting off an MMO using VC, I can tell you beyond the shadow of doubt that interface between developer and VC is a full-time job for one person,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
right? There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. While people can wear multiple hats, the that hat is going to be worn by somebody, and they're going to have it on almost all the time, right? Because it is an incredibly communication intensive process to keep VC involved in an MMO development process.
And oddly,
It,
people take their tens of millions of dollars seriously.
oh yeah, as one would expect, right? Um, it is much simpler in contrast to keep a publisher on board, but it is still one of the most important hats that can be worn, right? Um, I had the opportunity to sit in that role many times over the years. Um, it's one of my favorite things about making MMOs, actually, right? Um, Again, it all goes back to being a DM and entertaining a small group of people. If you take on that responsibility, you need to be able to represent, you should represent the quality of what you do. You should be able to elaborate on it, to talk about it, to get people interested and enthused about what it is you're building. I'm still enthused about every game I ever worked on, right? That I was personally invested in. I have, I've worked a bit on various games that never saw the light of day. I've helped people, I helped somebody write a pitch for Nancy Drew Online, which I can promise you I was not invested in, right? But Harry Potter Online, you better believe I was invested in the possibility of bringing, the magical world of Harry Potter into a, full on MMO.
It's funny you
I,
use that example. I've got the inverse. I don't know enough about Harry Potter, but I was pushing Nancy Drew so much at my last company, which was a Swedish online horse adventure game for girls, and I was like, I try to get them hype. I'm like, we are building this generation's Nancy Drew. Like the future female leaders of the world are gonna look back when they were adventuring on this island and doing cool ass shit. Like, take this seriously. This is so yeah.
I still have my Nancy Drew pitch. I occasionally stumble across it. It was incredibly restrictive, the et cetera, and just it was something that I couldn't personally get into. But then to contrast it, I ate, lived, and breathed Harry Potter for over a year.
Yeah, I
You
can
know, I had
imagine.
a 1961 Ford Anglia in my garage, right? I had the flying car from Harry Potter, right?
Well,
Literally morning, noon, and night, Harry Potter, everything.
I'm gonna so because you mentioned car, I need to tick this off the list real quick so I don't
Sure.
forget it. And then you got Fisher in chat asking a question, and it felt like we were at a nice point when we were talking about VC and stuff like that to transition and do some discussion about Sigil and Vanguard. But before we do that, I remember one of the first things was the damn Mad Max car. So one of the
Oh
first
yeah.
things about you that when I don't know if I
I,
saw at one of the first parties or hmm?
I just tripped into it yesterday trying to move a box. It's still
the
down there.
the full you so for those of you that don't know, Jeff has the actual full on Mad Max car. It's a thing.
Yeah, the black Ford Falcon that he drove around with in the end of the movie and killed all the guys in the motorcycle gang. Very fun car.
Yeah. Yeah. The last of the what is it? The last of the V10 interceptors, or what was the line from the movie?
The last of the V8 interceptors.
V8. Oh, I gave it two
Yeah,
more.
the MFP logo is on my refrigerator.
Yeah, dude. When I saw that thing for real, I was just like, what a
It's
crazy, ridiculous world I live in.
Man, I'll tell you, Gelor, Geller the Bard from original EQ Beta. He and I are still friends. His name's Eric Nilsson. He ended up working at Sigil. Bill Fisher knows him. Um, Eric got in that car when I was going to the gas station. I was like, come on, jump in. We'll drive down to the gas station. I need to fill it up. He would not ride back from the gas station in the car with me. He made my wife pick him up in her car, and he rode back with her because he was too scared.
Not to call anybody out or anything, but yeah.
Yeah,
So
he was.
that car, did you drive it to the gas station and fill it up, and then by the time you got back, you needed to go back to?
It drove me to the gas station.
Uh,
That car, I mean, it's just a monster. I mean, the wheels break loose every time you shift the gears, right? Supercharged, freaking smoke, steam, unburnt fuel. It is a freaking nightmare.
so
It's
much
like,
fun.
yeah, it's like sitting on a bomb, right? It's like riding down the road on a bomb.
And he said bomb. Many of the people in chat probably heard bong. I know that's a common theme in chat, but he said bomb, sitting on a bomb. Different kind of smoke.
B, and B.
Yeah.
I see what you're about, Bill Fisher. Fortunately, Bill Fisher asked if I could do the even the door line. We're talking about being enthusiastic about your games and being an evangelist. At one point in time, I don't even remember how the even the door thing came up. Bill, you're gonna have to refresh my memory. What was I even talking about? But I got caught on YouTube about talking about Vanguard and something about the doors responding to like your guild tag or some such happy horse shit. Yeah, it went like I was out of control basically in the video and said, "Even the door." And as YouTube clip artists go, they captured it and lengthened it out. But
Oh
fortunately,
man.
the video's disappeared. I don't even have a copy of it myself.
Oh yeah. So it's funny. The second I watched that come up in chat and you go through it, I remember a number of speeches of that sort back in the day. So
Yeah, a number of thumping the desktop sort of expansive orations.
yes, yes. And stories about sitting higher in chairs and desks rising on their own and all sorts of enthusiastic metaphors and imagery. So
Oh, I forgot about that metaphor. I'll have to weave that into my future conversation here in the near future.
Bill says, I still use 2 inches higher in their seats. Yep. Oh
People,
man.
the number of times people are like, "Why would I be sitting 2 inches higher in my seat?" And I'd be like, "Because you'll have shit yourself."
Yes. So
Great times.
Vanguard. I
Vanguard's
I
of Hero.
basically got my job right as all of you guys were leaving to make a new company.
Yeah. Vanguard Saga of Heroes. Very similar to Shadows of Luclin. Very similar. Very ambitious.
A lot of fans in chat. So as we've had people on, as we've had Bill on and others, and just having conversations, a lot of love for Vanguard. So honestly, any insight you can provide is going to be appreciated.
It kills me. It kills me that game is not accessible. When I say kills me, I mean I've tried to find my old uh, saved copies of the server side code and everything to see if I could cobble together my own server, right, and log on to the game. Like I'm a big proponent of games never sunsetting.
I
I
agree.
think I think there should be, at a minimum, there should be a subsidiary company that simply takes, that takes everybody's MMOs, right? You pick the name, right? That somebody doesn't want to run anymore and keeps them going. Whether it's crowdfunded, as it is in the case of City of Heroes, but I'm tired of a group of executives who don't play, don't know anything about the product, don't give a flying shit about the product itself or any of its players, saying, let's just sunset this game. Hey, we're not making $130,000 a month with this game anymore. It's I don't feel that it's contributing to the bottom line. Let's just go ahead and shut it down. I'm sick
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah. So one of the ideas, and it's funny because I started researching nonprofits and nonprofits as they relate to publishing, and I found there's at least one, maybe more, nonprofit game publishers out there that are true nonprofits. But one of the things on our bucket list is if we are ever successful and have some of that Tiggle Biddies money, then we want to start a nonprofit that's focused on looking at acquiring those types of rights and supporting that movement, because so many people that I've met since I started streaming are huge proponents of just sort of archiving and keeping and ensuring that there's access to those games, and I think it'd be a really fun thing to be able to pull off.
I agree. I think it's certainly a worthwhile endeavor. It bugs me that games that I've worked on in the past have ended up in that situation. Landmark, the pre-prototype to EverQuest Next, Vanguard, which had a much more engaged and large player base over its years. The game could still be in development with volunteers.
Yep.
Right, as you said, not if a nonprofit company could have volunteer developers coming in and out. Those games could continue to grow. I mean, there's 808 chunks of the continent of Avro that still need to be modeled and put into the game.
Yeah, and it looks like we've got someone from the Vanguard emulator community here in chat. Is that correct?
Yeah. Actually, Bill Fisher just mentioned, that they shut down Tannerus when it was still profitable, just because they didn't feel like messing with it anymore.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense to me. The amount of effort that it takes to sustain those games is minimal indeed.
Yeah, the previous German company that I worked for had a number of games. Basically, as things went into maintenance mode, they still had a team. It was just this one team had 10 games or whatever, and they'd add a little bit here and there. And it's funny because at the end of the day, I mean, they're a scrappy little team, maybe 10 people with a handful of or several handfuls of games. When you added up everything that they were bringing in, it was a very profitable team, and they still contributed to our bottom line in a decent way. So they had a seat at the table, and that's one of the things that we talk about a lot, is because we're looking at, maybe crazy, but how do we make something that's a little indie MMO with a very, very strong focus on just profitability? How do we stay small enough? How do we make it so that there's not a massive payback window? It's going to be a very core thing, and there's going to be a grind or whatever. But how do we hit a point where we have just enough people that we're profitable, and then we can continue to build on that? Because, I mean, shit, profitability is super, at least in my limited 20 years now in the industry, profitability is a underrated thing. Everybody's looking for the hundreds of millions of dollars instead of like, well, how do we have something that pays people a decent wage, sustains itself, and can grow a base?
Well, keep in mind, as far as MMOs are concerned, you have a little story that you can tell people. Right? EverQuest, for the amount of money that was invested in it, is the most profitable venture that Sony Corporation ever engaged in its history. And there is nothing that even remotely compares to it.
I can believe that in terms of profitability, for sure. I mean, EverQuest was paying for all of the crazy expansion that was going on at SOE when I was there, and
It's it's the explanation for the reason why things were allowed to go so far sideways,
mm,
right?
yeah,
Because you know Sony Online Entertainment basically had a pass, having been the creator of what was literally still mentioned in Sony board meetings and Sony investor relations calls as the most successful, percentage wise, pro- product that the entire corporation had ever been responsible for.
yeah.
Right. I mean, when I took over as producer, we were still over 60% profitable, right? We were still paying royalties to our employees, something that's almost unheard of in the industry today,
Mm.
right?
Yeah, no, it's
Uh,
crazy. It was there's so many different things that I look back on. I'm so thankful I came in the industry when I did. And when I look at the fact that there are royalties, I haven't seen it in that way since at any company, and is crazy. My first job in the industry, I'm mid 20s and I'm working on this thing and I'm getting a quarterly, bonus. It was just mind blowing. I thought that's the way the industry worked, and then surprise, never again. So it's one of those things that left an impression, and I would love to
I
recreate.
I once handed one of my EQ Live team members, who had come up through the apprentice program. I handed him a check that was, I believe, 87% of his yearly salary. I handed him a quarterly royalty check
Mm,
that was 87% of what he would make an entire year as an associate designer.
yeah. No, I know
It's awesome.
it differed from person to person, so I tend to be careful and respectful of everybody's own experience. But I do have to say that yeah, it made a significant impression on me, and definitely changed my life during that period. I wish I could go back and uh you know tell my 20 something year old self not to spend money like an idiot. It would have been nice to have all of that invested somewhere, but shit, it was fun.
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
so when
Somebody,
we were
great
talking about
question.
Vanguard a second ago, it seemed like I don't want to tap into anything that's like a too sort of a subject or whatever, but again, I would love to sort of understand and get insight into the.
Yeah, let's definitely loop around. Dobbs asked a great question. What was the downfall of Vanguard? What went wrong? Um, in summary, what went wrong with Vanguard was the Vanguard was an amazingly ambitious product, right? Um, like Lineage 2, which drew from Unreal 2.5, exactly like we were doing. Um, and I'll give you the direct contrast. Why problems with Vanguard? Why no problems or fewer problems with Lineage 2? You have launch success and stability with Lineage 2, and you had problems with Vanguard. Simple. Day one, Lineage 2 had 14 programmers on staff, right? 14 programmers there to work with Unreal 2.5 to translate that great first person shooter engine into a client server architecture for a massively multiplayer game. Huge undertaking, but you're one step ahead because you've got this great renderer, you've got this great set of tools that many people have built upon and iterated on, and a huge knowledge base at your back, right? So even though the developers were in Korea and there was a language barrier, they were able to make a successful MMO with Unreal 2.5. We had a solid, secure publisher, but universally at that time, there simply wasn't an understanding on this side of the pond that if you were going to make a massively multiplayer game and it was going to be a AAA title, it needed a massive investment to go along with that,
Mm,
right? It happened later on, right? Once World of Warcraft proved that millions of people would play a massively multiplayer game, someone came along and put $280 million into the development of SWTOR, right? But we were working with Microsoft, and while Microsoft had deep pockets, they still thought that that $12 million was a lot of money to spend on the game.
mm,
And do the math. SWTOR, $280 million. The first approved contract for Vanguard Saga of Heroes, just under $12 million, right, to develop the game.
and so then that naturally leads to, because those numbers have logistical meaning, right? So what did it look like in terms of?
You can't have 14 engine programmers uh, on, I won't say a shoestring budget, but you simply can't field the talent that's necessary to make everything easy, right? Unless you are extremely well funded. Brad and I felt that we were strong evangelists, that we were in a good position having just created EverQuest, but we were still, we struggled to overcome that understanding on the part of our counterparts at Microsoft that what we were talking about building really needed a huge influx of investment to create, right?
Mm,
We needed, 14 programmers or more on staff to begin with. We had 12 guys working on Vanguard when we started, and only a handful of them were programmers, right? So that's the reason why Vanguard didn't meet people's expectations.
yeah.
Plain,
And
right?
it's difficult because it's um you've got that staff, you've got the inherent challenges, as you mentioned, going in with Unreal 2.5, and I could have sworn DCO was Unreal 2.5 as well, and I honestly had forgotten about the Lineage 2 example and Vanguard using the engine, but I know the troubles we had on that project getting it ready.
The reason why I use Lineage 2 as an example is, um, you know, in terms of the time that development began, it's a little more contemporary with
Mm,
Vanguard, right?
yeah.
And uh, it came up multiple times when we struggled with Unreal 2.5. Epic was a great company to work with, but they did tell us, you know, to to ensure the success of this process, we just want you to know, yeah, the guys working on Lineage 2 had 14 programmers on day one, and their programming staff is now much larger than that, right? I
Yeah.
mean, we had 14 programmers, you know, and more by the time we had 75 people working at Sigil, right? Which is several years into the development process. It just, you know, Vanguard Saga of Heroes ended up being an approximately 28 to $32 million game, depending on who you talk to, and the amount of money that Microsoft put in on their end with their executive producers and external people, right? So that was Vanguard's budget in a nutshell. If you had seen a $75 million Vanguard, it would have been a much more polished product, right? At release.
So the with that in mind, the level of ambition, right? Because it's so you've got the inherent technical challenges and challenges inherent to basically getting Unreal to do what you're going to need it to do on the design side and things like that. Because that's one of the things we noticed with some of the other Unreal projects within Sony, and looking at Huxley, I think at the time, which was from I think Webzen,
Right.
another Korean company, and when we looked at things like Matinee and Kismet, it was like, oh, this is really cool. It's not going to work for what we need it to do. And at the end of the day, I need something where we can interface with tens and hundreds of thousands of records and all of this stuff. Um, the do you the level of ambition in terms of the game design and the systems and the scope of the world, was that when you couple all those things together, uh, what was the thinking there? It's like, if if we go hard enough, this thing, it'll work itself out, or
Oh wow, what is the answer to that question? Um, what we what we thought was that the one thing that we felt we were able to guarantee that we could do a good job at, because we had done it before, was to create content, right? So, you know, making quests for players running around in the town of New Targanor
mm,
was the easiest thing for us to do, right? As developers, and as a studio in total. So we assumed that that part of it we would have no problem pulling off. Um, like with everything, building a massively multiplayer game, the problem arises where the connections to all the other aspects of the game, right? The mechanical components of a functioning engine, animations, particle effects, the database,
mm-hmm,
all of these things that had to be created. Too many of them didn't have enough resources allocated to them, didn't have enough attention, and didn't have enough people with the requisite talent actually working on them.
yeah,
So, we ended up in trouble with animations, particle effects, having torn out a bunch of the elements that existed in uh, Unreal 2.5 and tried to redo them on our own
mm-hmm,
to improve on them, right? And we didn't have people who were experienced with making a full animation system, a full particle effect system, all from scratch.
yeah,
So we ended up in dire straits, um, trying to go through that process of recreating portions of Unreal 2.5 that we should have just left alone or adapted to our purpose rather than try to rebuild.
right. Was there what was
We
the
could we could talk for hours about every aspect of that problem of Vanguard alone. It's so complex. There's so many working components that got messed up.
oh, so and when you say that, is that are you saying extrapolated out across the various teams and decisions, or strictly just in?
In general, we had an issue of sorts in every one of the disciplines managing uh, managing the assembly of all the components that go into a functional, stable, bug-free MMO, right? If there ever has been such a thing, right? I mean,
I
I
don't
I
think there
sit on
has.
I there has I sit on Wowhead still every day, even though I'm not playing World of Warcraft, and I read the litany of issues that they continue to go through now, in a well-funded, well-established game, and it's clear that these are problems that we'll probably never solve. It's an issue of solving them to an acceptable degree, right? And where I think where Vanguard fell short between its vaunting ambition and desire to build everything from scratch, right?
Yeah,
Um, those two things required more time, more resources, more funding, and more talent, right? In certain circumstances than we were ever able to assemble, right? We didn't have the money, we didn't have the talent, we didn't have the time, And the result was exactly what you saw in Vanguard, right? Problems with chunking, problems with animations, aspects of the game not being able to be overcome, right? The fact that there was little instancing, right? The shared EverQuest experience of everyone going into the same dungeon, right? These are horrible problems for a game to have to overcome that we didn't have time to deal with and make up solutions for because of all the problems that we were having putting Vanguard together.
How quickly did that team ramp up? You said 75 people. What was that progression?
Well, the team ended up at about 95 developers at its largest size, 95, 98 developers. But it ramped up slowly, right? Basically a slow curve.
Okay.
We started off with 12 people. A couple people actually quit their jobs at Sony Online Entertainment before we could even pay them or offer them opportunities, right? We weren't actually able to hire anyone because we didn't have any money yet. And people were like, "We're here. We're ready to start." Bill Fisher is an example.
Mm.
Pretty sure Bill just showed up at the door and was like, "Hey, I'm ready to go." We are like, "Hey, we're not ready to hire you. We don't have our money from Microsoft yet, right? We're not even sure we're going to do this with Microsoft. It may be another company." Oh yeah, there you go. So yeah, he tried to quit and show up, and Brad was like, "No, no, 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 right? Don't do it."
Right.
But other people actually did do it. They were like SOE, and they showed up at our door, and they're like, "We're ready to start working."
Yeah, it was it seemed like it was kind of a there was the event. It was all right, Brad's leaving
Right.
and this is what's going on. Then there was a little trickle and then boom, folks disappeared.
Yeah.
The was it the same sort of design from the onset? Is it a design that as you guys uh kept going and adding people and talking, did the scope grow with that, or was it always meant to be this ambitious project?
Well, I would say that Vanguard's. Uh, I can answer the question in two directions, right? Vanguard's core design, right? In other words, the elevator pitch for the game, like here's what we're going to do. That is very close to what ended up being shipped, right? The elevator pitch didn't change a whole lot, right? We knew what we wanted. We wanted these three pillars: adventuring, crafting, diplomacy, right? With diplomacy being kind of the newest of
Hmm.
those three, the most unusual. Um, the early promise of Vanguard from those two-page pitch documents is pretty much what we drove toward throughout the entire creation of the game, right? So that's one part of your answer. The second part of your answer is where did Vanguard's scope problems arise, right? Right? Where did Vanguard grow in scope beyond our clearly beyond our ability to execute?
Mm.
And the answer to that question is the Vanguard world in size and in detail grew. It actually was executed beyond the scope and scale that we were able to support, right? So, in other words, rather than prove that we could that we could successfully build a an area of
Mm.
game
Okay.
X by X size and fill it with content and detail, as let's say some of our competitors have, World of Warcraft being a great example, right? There are very few places in World of Warcraft in the game world where you can go and find a 3 meter by 3 meter square of the game world that someone didn't personally go in and work on as an artist or a game designer, right? You know, that something is shaped, there's flowers there, there's a couple of rocks, right? There's detail everywhere in the world that makes it look like it was curated, makes it look like it was handcrafted, right? That somebody cared about every square 10-yard area of the game, right? That's where Vanguard's scope went crazy,
Mm,
right? We were vastly unable to harness the tools that Unreal 2.5 offered us to build a world that was curated on a 1 meter by 1 meter scale, which is what I would have liked to see.
yeah. Yeah, and it's a challenge. I don't know if it's the right way to do it or not, but that's one of the things we've been discussing a lot as part of the little project we're working on is essentially just keeping our proof of concept areas very constrained and continuing to iterate and learn and iterate in those zones before we go broad, and then determine is if this is good. Now let's look at the metrics. Let's talk about what it took to get here, and now we can determine how far we can extrapolate.
Keep your proof of concept area tiny,
Yep.
right? Keep it tiny, right? And build it in such a way that the people who see it and the people who experience it are blown away. That you've got this concept area that is perfection, right? It illustrates your talents as a development team and your capabilities. Then and only then expand larger, right?
Yep.
Say now
Exactly.
everything that we've learned, right? Everything that we've decided in creating this small area is going to be applied in the following way to this larger area, right? And expand in that direction. Don't do what we did and decide that, okay, 16 kilometers by 8 kilometers is a good size for our first continent. Go.
Right. Yeah.
Then you get situations where you've got a single designer who has 1 day to populate an area of the world that's 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers, or 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer. It's just impossible, right? When you want a curated experience, you need you need that guy to have months to populate and work on that specific area, right? Bill Fisher, remembers these horrible experiences of, Thestra one chunk a day, right? We're going to do a chunk of Thestra every single day, right? Things of that nature.
It's like it's
It's
funny
just,
as you're describing it. It's like handing a designer San Andreas. It's just like, all right, this week we need you to implement San Andreas, and get ready to do the next game afterwards. Speaking of, Bill
it,
just said I would sum it up a bit with we fell in love with the concept of the world, but not the reality of the world we were crafting.
yeah. Part of the issue that's inherent in building a massively multiplayer game is, as a developer, you can thumbnail the amount of effort and time that it's going to take to accomplish a certain task, but until the task is done, you can't be sure that that's the case. Um, we we had on one hand a massive ambition. On the other hand, we had a funding source that also desired a massive game, right? I won't say that there was pressure to make a massive game, but there was a collective pressure to make a huge immersive game world, right? Where you could sail across the ocean blue, where a continent that you are not standing on actually feels distant from you,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where the idea that you're going to go from one end of the continent to the other has some meaningful sense, in terms of your engagement. And this was our desire, right? It was our mantra when we sat down to talk about Vanguard before we ever hired our first employee. And um, when you couple that with the reality of what you're actually able to create at a certain velocity. Oh, my cat has decided to come say hello.
Yeah, it's pet day. This is amazing.
Merlin decided that I'm just sitting here yakking at the camera. In other words, doing nothing important as far as he's concerned. So
Same
he's
with
like,
my
you
pup.
you would be much better off just petting me.
Yep. Yep. But yeah, the it, there's always hindsight.
Yes, there
But
is.
man, it's interesting because as somebody that was on the outside, I was still on EQ during that, and we started looking at as we were developing a better understanding of the ambition. I I'm a lot of times I'm the fun police. I think that's why I moved out of design and moved into production. And I'll look at projects. You mentioned sweater, and as soon as I see super high fidelity cinematic, every quest is blah blah, and I'm just like, oh shit, how are they going to sustain that? Are they going to keep
Yep.
that 800-person team after launch? It's so
I mean, I could see game development staff moving to more movie-like, um, a more movie-like configuration where it's not just the team of developers, but it's, 500 people who are subcontracted, right, through, just like, every Marvel movie has a list of credits that's, 15 minutes long
yeah, it's
after,
crazy.
right? I could see games moving to that sort of configuration because you can't afford to keep all this talent on staff afterwards, right? I mean, we talk about Lineage 2 having 14 programmers on day one. Back in the day, programmers were making over $100,000 a year if they had any talent, right? That's a significant investment in programming on day one, right? You ask, what do you have to show for a prototype? We don't have a prototype yet. We just started,
Right.
right? I got 14 programmers alone working on building our prototype, right? I paid $750,000 for a license to Unreal 2.5. And I've got these 14 programmers, and I've got the designers and the management staff. So we have a massive sunk cost on day one, right? And we don't even have a prototype to show yet. We're not going to have a prototype for months, right? Having dealt with VC, having dealt with upper management, these are all hard conversations to have when the people with their hands on the purse strings don't really understand what's going on. Arguments are being made that maybe the market is already saturated, and you're just talking about cannibalizing players from existing MMOs.
Yeah. Yeah. And so can I ask, because it's one of those things where um it's even a difficult one to bring up, but I'd feel weird if I didn't. Those discussions, you mentioned before, like essentially you and Brad had to deal with a lot of that, and then it sounds like you maybe did it more than Brad. I I had occasion to talk to or run into Brad when I was there, or talk to him at parties or stuff like that. Was in a few meetings where you guys were all together, and usually at that point though he would come in sort of aside from the core of the meeting because he was having to do so many other things. Um, I'm real curious. What was that something that he enjoyed dealing with, or did you have to come down to a lot? Like you had to jump on a lot of that. I'm trying to understand the personality there because a lot of people come in and ask me, and I'm like, guys, I don't really have any good insight on.
I could talk for hours about the dynamic and the differences in terms of our basically what he and I individually brought to the table, right? My perspective and engagement has always come from playing the game, right?
Mhm.
Or playing a game like it, right?
Right.
To this day, I'm balls to the wall in Path of Exile, Terraria, every massively multiplayer game I can get my hands on, Lost Ark, Diablo 3, you name it. That's what I do, play games. What I did back then, play games, right? Anarchy Online, Ultima Online, yeah, everything down the list, uh, up until today. Um, Brad brought his desire for the game that he wanted to see, not from EQ, right? But from games prior to it that muds, right? That
Mhm.
his favorite games were muds. His desire was to see a 3D mud that more or less matched the visceral experience that he had in text, right? Come to life, right? That was his inner vision for what he was hoping to see and play, which never happened, right? So it was a disparity between he and I because I was, you know, balls to the wall with World of Warcraft, EverQuest 2, every massively multiplayer game I could get my hands on at the time, and he was striving toward a goal that hadn't yet been realized in any massively multiplayer game.
Yeah, I can
If that
picture and I can understand that. It makes perfect sense.
right, I mean, there's truthfully, there may not even literally be a single person left alive who could explain the actual details of the difference between his thinking and my thinking. The person who probably would most closely pin it down would be Bill Fisher,
Mm,
right? Bill was friends with Brad, right, and could certainly compare and contrast, what Brad was bringing to the table and what I wanted to bring to the table, and where they were different, right?
mhm.
And that was precisely the point at which, you know, when he and I were looking at things from two different perspectives. That's the source of those perspectives. I was in the games. He was looking for something that hadn't yet been created,
Yeah.
which at some point in time in the future we may see, right? I mean, have you read Ready Player One?
Yeah, yeah.
Right? No one would deny that the actual game of Ready Player One, if it existed, would be a kick in the nuts, right? Oh, you've got all this stuff that you earned. You've died. You lose it all. The stuff that you had earned, the stuff that you earned was what was worth $100,000 in real life money. Your character just died. It's all gone. Right? Who would put up with that? Right? Talk about high barrier to entry, and it's freaking crazy, right? Go
And yet,
go
as
back.
you say it, there's a part of me that immediately tingles, and it's like, oh,
It's
but
all or
what
nothing.
if? What if you
Yeah,
get to keep your
but
shit?
what if? Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing thing, potentially.
Nick,
However,
Nick just asked a great question.
oh,
What part
geez.
of Brad's vision, what parts of Brad's vision were not realized by EQ or Vanguard, from your perspective?
So it's a. I will attempt to summarize. Um, Brad played. He played a specific mud back in the day. I think it was Toral mud. Um, I'm sure Bill Fisher actually remembers the name of the mud because he played in that mud with Brad, right? Um, Brad's hope was to realize a game like Toral Mud, which was set in Forgotten Realms, in 3D, right? And there were certain aspects of Toral Mud gameplay, the sense of not the sense of having to memorize how to get from one point to another, right? That every single person had to keep the map, as it were, in their head, right?
Mm,
You had to know how to get from Nariac D to another area of the world, and if you didn't know, well, then you have to ask someone, right? Because there's not a map, right? You have to learn. You have to explore the world and make it your own, right? Because there's no way to cheat, right? There shouldn't be a website that you can go to and look at a 2D map of the zone. Bitch, get
hmm.
your ass in the game and learn. how to get out of the area that you're at, right? You don't ask me for a damn dungeon map or a freaking mini map in the corner of the screen. Bitch, learn the dungeon, right? If you don't know how to get around the dungeon, your ass doesn't belong in here, right? That is just one fragment of what Brad wanted to be, a foundational element in the game that he wanted, right? And I mean, it was non-negotiable, right? That he had to have that in a game, right?
Yeah.
The game couldn't be a success for him unless it included elements along those lines.
Yeah. So and Bill just mentioned wanted you to live in that world. Yeah, it's interesting because I was going to ask, was it more rooted in the challenge or the immersion? Um, I'm assuming more the latter.
I'm assuming that a lot of it was the latter because Brad as a player was much less about he was much less personally about the challenge, right? Um, Much more about feeling that he was an active component of the world and that every aspect of what the world was delivering was part of the reward, right?
Mm,
Like, why would I hand you a map? Why would I hand you a map? If I gave you a map, I would be screwing you, right? I would be screwing you out of the satisfaction of learning that you don't walk into that little alcove that has a tree in it in uh, uh, you know in this dungeon. Otherwise, you'll fall into the false floor that's in the middle of the tree, and you'll be down in a deeper area of the dungeon. And you'll die,
yeah.
right? If I gave you a map, you just make a little mark on it that says "Don't go there," right? And I'd be screwing you, right? I'd be cheating you out of this knowledge of the world that is your reward for exploration and cooperation with your fellow players, right? And there's an aspect of truth, of unquestionable truth in that, um, but it broaches the argument of that game being a, let's say, 250,000 player game and a more, let's say, information friendly game being a multi-million player game, right? And that's where, um, you know, Brad's focus was in this Toral mud derived immersive world. My focus was more in the yeah, well, I want to build a better World of Warcraft meets Minecraft meets EverQuest, where you know you can dig down 5 kilometers in the ground and find a dungeon underground and a natural system of caves that holy shit, it's the Underdark.
Right.
Damn, right? I had a different view. And plus, I knew that it was going to take hundreds of millions of dollars to make the game that I wanted to make. You can't present a set of ideas. You can't deliver a pitch to anyone for something small that doesn't make a lot of money.
Yeah. Yeah. Um,
It's
it,
impossible.
it's funny because that's a discussion that we've had. It's like, why are we taking the time that we are and bootstrapping and things like that for proof of concept? It's because we want, you know what? If we were to get, I mean, 250,000 subscribers, hell, small enough team, 25,000 subscribers is not a bad day. And so
Yeah.
it's one of those things where the second the second we go and ask for the big chunk of money, it needs to then be able to be the game that's got the ambition of no, we're not shooting for 100,000 or 200,000 subs or whatever. Yeah, we want to make a dent in the universe and we want to be the next WoW, and that's how people get money thrown at them, and then that money goes for a while, and then the game often. I mean, we haven't seen many things surpass WoW at this point, so I'm assuming most of those pitches didn't work, and then those people just do it again, and it's a way to make a living, I guess.
Yeah, it takes. It takes somebody who has an invested belief either in the potential of massively multiplayer games or an understanding of the strength of their IP, and most preferentially, a combination of those two things,
Yeah.
right? Um, the failure, SWOTOR, right? Money, yes, lots of money, but execution, no, right? $280 million. The end result, mm, underwhelming, right?
Mm.
But on the other hand, you've got Square Enix with Final Fantasy 14. You've got a company that has unshakable faith in the quality of their intellectual property, right? They have a long history of execution and ability to manage massively multiplayer game. In this case, Final Fantasy 11, which was quite successful. It ended up outstripping EverQuest during its lifetime. They exceeded 500,000 subscribers at one point in time. Um, but they used Final Fantasy 11 as a springboard to put themselves into Final Fantasy 14. Now 14 has overtaken World of Warcraft
Mhm.
number of subscribers, and they're going strong.
Yeah.
They continue to move forward. They I'm not sure whether they have another MMO in development, but they certainly strike me as a sort of company where one can expect to see another product that is an MMO, like a Sword Art Online in the Final Fantasy universe, find traction, right? Because they can see the success of their products, they can see the iterative expansion of the marketplace, they can see the potential of the science fiction of games, VR and AR games not yet realized, right? And they can push, and they have the money to do so. And they have a stable intellectual property that people love,
Yeah.
that they can place it in. These are the things that I wanted for Sony Online Entertainment, right? In 1999, I argued to Brad and John and the other managers at SOE that SOE had the opportunity to become the Blizzard of massively multiplayer games. But we had to be smart, we had to be hard, we had to make decisions, and sometimes people wouldn't like those decisions, right? We had to recruit talent, and we had to be serious about what we were doing, right? And that required, developers who weren't making minimum wage,
Mm.
right? That required people with talent, that was already established. The strength of people like yourself, people like Todd Schmidt, Bill Fisher, who joined the development team, who ended up becoming successful and making great content for our customers. That's because we were fortunate and we picked good people, right? There was literally no one on the EverQuest Live team who had, a wealth of game development experience.
Yeah, that's true.
No one, right? Our success was by virtue of the fact that people were willing to stay till 2 o'clock in the freaking morning to get shit done, right? We did it the hard way, right? We brute forced what we were able to accomplish.
Yeah,
Right?
there's a lot of sheer force of will during that era.
Yeah, precisely the case. It was done by sheer force of will, right? There are times where I sat in people's offices who were like, "That can't be done," and I was like, "No, no, no, no. You don't understand. These were actually weren't people on the development team. People in peripheral uh, disciplines at Sony Online Entertainment, like web development, for instance. People are like, "Oh yeah, no, no, we can't do that. We've got a lot of things ahead of this thing that you need us to do." I was like, "No, wait, 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 wait. What are those things? Let me see them." Oh, here they are. Like, yeah, none of this takes precedence to what EverQuest needs.
mm,
And they'd be like, well, what do you mean? Like, this is what we're getting from our bosses. And I was like, here, let me reorganize this list for you. Let me put EverQuest at the top, and Do you have any questions? Well, I need to get approval from my boss. I was like, give me the list. I'll go take it to your boss and get approval. Do you understand? EverQuest is the product that pays for the electricity in this building,
It's funny
right?
you say that, and so after you left and Pfister took over, he would often just drag us along with him to the other building and to meetings and stuff. And I heard those conversations firsthand. He was a giant man, and so he would stand in the middle of whether it be the web or PR and marketing or whatever, and roar those words. It's like, guys, we pay your bills. What, huh?
Right. And I mean, you don't want to be an asshole, right? I didn't ever want to be an asshole to people, right? But when it comes down to it, everyone needs to be on board, right? We are a team. We're rowing in one direction ultimately, right? And that direction is make money, satisfy customers,
But
create games.
during that period, there was, and we've talked about this a bit, and I understand because like at the onset of this conversation, it was the expectation was 75,000 customers that lasts a year. So I
Right.
get that several years down the line, there's a belief that, well, this thing's not going to be around much longer, and the new things that we're doing are going to overtake it. But it was just a really weird feeling to see the numbers continue to go up and
Yep.
already be sort of discussed as if you're the thing that's atrophying and the focus needs to be on the new stuff. To me, it was just kind of, it was personal because we're on a team, but also like, well, the shit still got momentum.
Yeah.
Let's see how far it can go.
And that's the thing. The problem with probably all companies really is if the guy who's ultimately making the decisions, all decisions at the highest level, is not the the one who truly understands where each product or the product, whatever it is the company's responsible for, needs to go, then you're going to end up with problems, right? You need a John Smedley, a Kelly Flock, a Brad McQuaid, a Jeff Butler. You need a person, whoever that person is, standing there saying, everyone, this is my expectation of you. Here are our focuses. Here's what we're going to focus on, right? We have our breadwinner. It's called EverQuest. It will get bigger. Your job is to make it so. Continue to make my customers happy, right? I talk to them personally. When they are unhappy, I pick up the phone. They tell me what's wrong. I stand in customer service. I listen to the GMs. I immerse myself in the business that makes us money, right? My expectation from you is that you will continue this process. You will own it. You understand? I'm here. I send out the patch in the morning. I listen to customers. I talk to them on the phone. I stand in customer service. I go over to the developers. I know what's coming, I know what's being worked on. I am a component of this process and I instruct you to continue it, right? I want every one of you to take ownership of your aspect of it, right? To understand your place in this organization. It's my requirement of you. It is the merit by which you will be judged at the end of every year when I tell you what your raise is going to be, when I hand you your royalty check. The people who work smarter, the people who make it happen, who bring us more customers are going to make more money. They're going to get big royalties, right? Et cetera, et cetera. Now, as the company gets bigger, you expand that to include other projects, other endeavors, whatever it is the company's trying to create. But you've got to have someone there responsible for that portion of it and moving forward and driving
Mm, yeah.
the money. What happened with Blizzard? These guys who were responsible for that project started to get inundated with money, right? They got quarterly royalties that were huge. They weren't getting $25,000 royalties. They were getting $250,000 royalty checks, right? and they suddenly became more worried about their next private jet trip to Las Vegas than they were worried about what was going on in their product, right? And how happy their customers were, which is understandable. It's called fat catting. Happens in our industry, and it's one of the reasons why royalties don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I feel fortunate that I probably will not be afflicted by that anytime soon.
but
But if it does happen, I'll be honest with you guys. I'll be like, listen, I understand you have problems. I'm gonna find somebody that gives a shit. I promise you, because I'm getting on my jet. But I'm just gonna be real with you.
that's the thing, right? You have to realize. I think coming from the perspective of a gamer, it's easier to realize that there will always be someone who gives a shit. I mean, it's how I became the EQ lead GM. It's how I became the EQ customer service
Yep.
manager. I became the producer of EverQuest, the VP, and then the president of Sigil Games Online, and then the creative director of EverQuest Live. You know, the the guy who was working on Harry Potter because I gave a shit,
Yeah.
right? I was the person that said, yeah, it has to be done. It has to be done right. I'm willing to make the hard choices. I'm willing to make the good choices. I will have the bad conversations with people who don't do their work and end up having to be fired. And I will also congratulate everyone and and build them up for their amazing talent and their contribution to our product.
Yeah.
It's if you look at it that way, it's not nearly as much effort as you would think it would be.
And yeah, no, it's not. And I've had sort of a similar discussion with folks in the past. It's just like you said. I had a similar career. I was a dude that was blown away by the game, and decided to work on the game and did it. And when people are like, "Well, how is that even possible?" It's like, well, I mean, I actually had a desire to do it. It's because so many people are like, I really want to do this. Well, you're going to have to move. Well, can I do it and not move? No.
Yeah.
Well, that's unfair. Well, yeah, life is kind of that way, dude. So you really don't want to do it. Yeah,
Yeah.
and so it's Uh, I do not discount timing or luck or any of that other shit, but so often it's really about giving a shit and illustrating that. And it's kind of if you read or seen the movie Fight Club, where you're standing on the porch and he comes out and says, "You're not coming in, leave," and you keep standing on the porch. Comes out the next day, "No, I'm not bullshitting. Get out of here." And you keep standing on the porch, and it's like, what do you need to do? Well, here's a broom if you're going to be on the porch. All right, man, I'm going to broom the hell out of this porch.
Sweep up. Yeah,
And
their VP. There's a guy who's a VP. I don't know what his current title is, but I know he works. He works in VC, right? He works with VC who are um, working in the video games industry, want to make their investments. Um, that guy got his job as a game developer because he was willing to do a job that no one else wanted to do. P point EverQuest zones. It was the shit task that literally was like, oh, the P pointer. Oh yeah, that is the most unfortunate person on the planet, right? He gets things late, right? Because it always takes too long for the zone to be built. Then it takes too long for the zone to be exported. Then he gets the zone and there are problems with it and it won't P point. So he has to take it back to the artist, get screwed over, have to wait an extra amount of time. It has to be exported again. And then he has to P point it in one evening because it's going to go live tomorrow, right? So he's always on the short end of the stick. That guy became a game developer because he was willing to do that job.
mm-hmm.
You know, when I looked around and said, okay, we just lost our P pointer. Who's going to be the next P pointer? He stood up and said, I will knock the shit out of P pointing. I will be the best P pointer that there ever has been who ever worked here. It was like, I'll be training people in P pointing for the next couple of years. And that's exactly what he did.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Steve Burke made some of the most complex content in EQ, right? Then moved on to make awesome content for World of Warcraft,
Mm-hmm.
right? That we enjoyed for years. Now he, as far as I know, he's stuck at Blizzard because they never fucking promote anyone, but who knows? I think he's still making content for World of Warcraft.
So
But that should be a VP by now.
yeah, Steve's amazing. He's a great
Yeah.
guy. It's been nice over the last year catching up with folks and chatting off stream, and he's always been high on my list because he was basically he was my mentor when he was an apprentice and I was trying to become an apprentice. So we'll always love
He,
Steve.
he's one of those people like his predecessor, Jason Polk, who took EverQuest and did things that the guys who built EverQuest looked at and said, "Yeah, that's not possible. What have you done?
Yeah.
How could you do that?" And he was like, "Oh, well, let me show you." And then they were like, "Oh my God, that's incredible."
That's incredible. Now please stop using 300 invisible men to do the hackiest shit ever. We'll fix this for you.
Yeah, we'll make it so that you can actually have a class of NPC that doesn't lag the zone out when the event starts. But yeah, I mean, he was a database, a database virtuoso, like some of the people who came before him. I used Jason Polk as an example back in the day. That guy was one of the most talented developers I've ever worked with.
Yeah.
He could program, he could make art, he could do design, and he was entirely self-taught and self-started.
Yeah.
He's one of the foundation stones that enabled the EQ Live team to even exist, right?
Do
For the
you talk to a lot of those guys still? Have you talked to many folks?
I haven't talked to any of them since Brad's funeral.
Okay. Yeah, because I've started digging. Basically, I kind of as I progress through this because I think it's only natural. I'm still kind of a shy guy. I've pinged the people that I knew, and I'm like, hey man, would you come on here? And then and it's kind of, and then I start pinging people where I'm like, well, I knew you, but I didn't know you that well. And then working down the list, and now I'm like, when I look at like you or Smed or somebody like that, I'm like, well, these guys were kind of like the boss's boss when back in the day, and I don't remember, like I don't think because I was also, I made my opinions pretty well known at times back then in forums that maybe wasn't the best move, like the 500 person, whatever it was, market research mailing list and shit. And so sometimes I'm like, I don't know. But I figure I can ask, and if you think I'm an asshole, you'll let me know. But here you are.
There was a lot of stuff to be dissatisfied about back then, right? I mean, that's why I left. I left to found my own company.
And like,
So if somebody,
how scary is that?
well, it's one of those things, right? We strive to improve, right? To make better games, to please, to reach a wider base of customers, right? That's why Brad and I went and started working on Vanguard. I can talk honestly about where it failed, but in many ways it pleased us. I mean, I still have, I literally still have tens of thousands of screenshots that I took of Vanguard, right? Amazing suits of armor for their time and cool NPCs, stuff that we're very happy with. You know, I want to see this continue. My most recent attempted endeavor was an AR version of Dungeons and Dragons. We sat down with Hasbro and an AR hardware manufacturer at the time and said, you know, wouldn't it be awesome to be able to put on, you know, kind of like a heavy pair of sunglasses, as it were, and look at the dining room table and have a castle and a dungeon, all animated, you know, with water pouring off the edge of the table, you know, into a lake on the floor. And, you know, you look at the little NPC miniatures on the floor, and the DM can pick one up and throw it out onto the living room floor, and it can become life size and walk around and talk to you about what your quest is, right? You know, huge, huge belief in that potential. But yeah, the AR hardware, Microsoft HoloLens went with enterprise, right?
Yeah.
All they want is enterprise solutions, having completely forgotten that the reason why PCs became popular and sold millions of units is because of games, right? So, you know, the HoloLens is out in enterprise land, and the other potentially competing piece of technology just never got off the ground. So,
Yeah, dude, preaching to the choir on that one. I've been such a huge fan forever. I interviewed at Magic Leap years and years ago, and was at the time I was hoping that it was right around the corner. And
yeah, it ain't.
they're still around, so I'll watch what I say because I NDA'd like crazy on that one. But I think I mentioned before is one of the few interviews where I left completely disillusioned and didn't care if I got the job. But I believe in, the era will get there. As soon as because the concepts all make sense, right? Overlaying, reskinning the world is pretty straightforward, and we already see it with face filters and all this other shit. It's great. They just got to miniaturize the hardware and deal with like versions convergence issues and all that other shit, but it'll get there. So
Once it's there, you know, playing augmented reality Dungeons and Dragons is going to be absolutely amazing. I plan to be involved.
yeah, it's funny because so a question we missed earlier, and then I'll also hit another question from Zoidberg. Question is, do you have any thoughts on the impact of streaming on MMOs?
Streaming is incredible. It is an amazing, amazing source of entertainment. Um, the idea that playing a game, watching someone play a game, and entertain you, uh, is it's one of those ideas that if you and I had sat down in 1999 and pitched it to the people who were arguing that there's only a million people willing to play an MMO, they just would have thought we were crazy,
Hmm.
right? They would have looked at us and thanked us for our time. You know, I've sat in front of the board of directors at Square Enix, for instance, and it's like sitting in front of stone statues. Right? You pitch to the board of directors at Square Enix, and you get no reaction whatsoever. Once your pitch is done, you're dismissed. And then afterwards, you know, your evangelist comes and tells you whether you did well or not, right?
Oh,
He'll
nice.
come out and
Fun.
go, "Oh yeah, they're not interested," or he'll come out and go, "Oh my God, they're so excited," right? I'd be like, "How would you have known that they were
Hmm.
excited?" Because it was like pitching to the statues at Easter Island, right? You know, there's absolutely zero emotion or engagement. But in fact, they were super excited, right? I came to learn later, you know, things of that nature. But yeah, these the opportunities that are out there uh, are absolutely incredible.
Another question that came up was, do you want to see another installation of the EverQuest series, and would you play it?
I want to see one. Yes. Um, would I play it? It really depends on the quality, right? On the quality. Um, it, my opinion of another version of EverQuest is it's going to take a massive team and a massive investment of money for that to happen, right? What I'm looking for is today a game that is open-ended and visually impressive as like Cyberpunk 2077, right? I want a world that sucks me in and blows me away with all the possibilities. Um, I would not be satisfied with a throwback. You know, it's got to be for me. I want more. I
Mm.
don't want rehash. I want games to go someplace, to take me to a new uh, a new level of immersion and experience. That's it's the only sort of game that I would really get excited about working on.
Yeah, it's interesting. Because I look at it, I come at it from a slightly different point of view with if there was a game of that quality and it hooked me, I could see it. The challenge I run into, and maybe this is unnecessary pessimism, and I know it's inherent in what you're describing as well, and I know you're not dismissing this point, but it's this idea of whenever I see the higher production values, higher fidelity games, I immediately start to assume all of the problems where it's okay, you're going to have a ton of shit that's set dressing and it's not going to be interactable. For every additional sort of like sparkly thing that's making it new and modern and bleeding edge, it feels like it's even more restrictive. And it kind of goes back to what you're saying, you know, about Brad and the desire to be able to have the immersion that you would have in text. And so for me, it goes back to some things we've discussed on the stream, which is like I've been playing the shit out of P99. I love it. And it's interesting because maybe I'm just sort of blowing smoke up my own ass when I think in these terms or whatever. But when I look at the simplicity of the art and the simplicity of the construction of the zones and things like that, it brings me back to like the Scott McCloud understanding comics sort of chart where he shows like the smiley face that's two dots and a, you know, a little curve, and then the fully realized, you know, fully drawn out photorealistic portrait. And the sort of the gist of that chapter is somewhere on that scale over towards the smiley face, you use your imagination and you put yourself in there in a way and you fill in the blanks where it's your personal world as opposed to everything being so spelled out. And
Right.
I think there's a weird, and maybe we even see that a little bit with the sort of, I know there's a lot more factors in this, but if you look at the big games last year, Fall Guys, Among Us, right, Valheim, it's there is something to that. And so often when I hear like MMO's got to be hundreds of millions of dollars, or new games got to be, you know, to get us over that hump and take us into something that immersive. It's like, yeah, if it can be that badass looking, but also allow for the imagination, allow for the highest degree of interaction, right? So,
You know, there's a really good example that I've actually been playing lately that we could bring up for a contrast. You know, my argument, the next big game has to be quote unquote Sword Art Online, with a, you know, $1 billion invested.
mm,
That's partially predicated on my personal preference of what I'd like to see, what I'd like to be involved with creating. On the other end of the scale, there's, you know, there's the clear reality that you could take a game like Terraria, right? 2D, right?
mhm.
Um, and you could create an MMO with that simple style of game, right? You could create a very interactive, very engaging, and fun, massively multiplayer style game using lower tech, pixel art, right? A massive technological throwback in terms of fidelity, so on and so forth. And you could focus on, you know, engaging gameplay. You know, pixel art is awesome, right? You can make great pixel art with you know, talented pixel art creators, and I think lots of people might be interested in playing a game like that. And I've got like 1,800 hours in Terraria,
Yeah.
right? I mean, as far as $10 games that I bought on Steam, it's the best $10 I've ever spent on a computer game in my entire life, right? And it's, it was developed by a small team of guys and girls, right? Um, an incredible product. You could make a massively multiplayer game that's that, you know, that's that much of a throwback in technology, scope, scale, you name it, and knock the ball out of the park. Um, Nobody's doing it that I know of, but sooner or later, someone will come along and, you know, do something along those lines. And, there's room for success in pretty much every little niche in between here and there. There are some intellectual properties that are strong enough that people would be drawn to them even if the game itself didn't push in the directions that I'm talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair points.
It just, you know, in my opinion, certainly in my observation and experience, there's no more complex a style of game than a virtual world because you're effectively, um, you know, whether you're evoking someone's imagination via the text, or you're actually showing it to them in 3D. You're recreating a full functioning world. It's a very complicated thing to do.
Yeah.
You've literally got MMO economists, right? You've got people who are talking about what if there was a style of cryptocurrency that was associated with your game, right? I've got WoWcoin. It is a cryptocurrency, right? I earn it by playing World of Warcraft. I spend it anywhere they accept this form of cryptocurrency, right? People talking about all these crazy possibilities of where this stuff is going to go in every permutation.
Yep. Yep. No, and I've said this for, I guess, for the last 20 years. It's definitely a very interesting time to be alive in this space.
It's very
You have a question in chat from Sigil.
Sitzel. Oh wow, what sort of player would I be? I am I am the player that tries to be the protagonist in the novel. So my I do both pen and paper and uh, PC games pretty heavily, and my push is always to be the protagonist, right? And you've got your Bartles ideas of you know explorer, et cetera, et cetera. I just try to insert myself as the protagonist. So I want to be the highest level player. I want to be the person driving the story, right?
Mm.
Whatever that is. It's really not possible always in games, but I'm the guy who's trying to have the only one of a certain weapon that exists on the server. The first person to a level. Not that I can manage that anymore. Um, Terraria 40K. That would be awesome.
As soon as it says, I saw that scroll by and I was just like,
Oh, holy crap! Yeah, I love 40K. Love the whole genre and lore. Terraria 40K would rock. That's a mod that I wouldn't even mind working on. I might start fiddling around with pixel art just to experience that.
we've inspired something new tonight. Awesome. So,
So, Sitzel, hopefully that was a good answer to your question. I do a lot of lit RPG reading. I probably roll through about 125 books a year. A lot of them are lit RPG. So there's a lot of stories there about person trapped in virtual world, right? It is a recurring trope, um, and being the protagonist is, honestly, that's I look at it as a career choice too, right? How did I get into video games? By trying to be the protagonist.
Cool, man. I just realized that we've had you on here for 3 hours and 15 minutes.
You're kidding me. Holy crap. That
It,
is a long, long interview. But this stuff is fun to talk about.
yeah, it's well, and it's funny. Like, I love the fact that these platforms exist and that we can have um conversations like that, like this these days. And I love that. I see what Bill's saying, and I love
Yes.
that people are actually watching this stuff. You know, thank you, Joe Rogan and others for making long format discussions something worthwhile. Yeah. So Bill's in chat saying, "Wait, Jeff being long winded? Not possible."
Yeah.
Oh man,
Particularly on these subjects, right? I mean,
yeah.
it's like, oh, where do you begin? How do you stop? Because I could blather on all day.
I tell you what. So we'll wrap this one up. That'll give us an opportunity to go use the restroom. And the thing that I'll be curious about is afterwards, if you enjoyed this, and you think of some specific, like points that we didn't have a chance to go deep on. If you've got, some ideas on like, hey, I realize afterwards, like we could have hit on this a little bit more or whatever. Absolutely love to have you back on. It's been nice to be able to have folks like Bill and Todd and others, and Brian yesterday again, like come on, and then at some point, I'd really love to find a way to get more sort of panel discussions or group discussions, because we did that with Bill and Doug and Todd, and it was a lot of fun. And have those be more just taking questions from folks. But
Yeah, that would be a lot of fun. Maybe get some of the people who worked on Luclin together and
mm,
focus on, here's what happened, here's what went wrong on Luclin, here's what went right, stuff like that. I'd certainly be available. It'll be a fun walk down memory lane.
yeah, right on. And we have a Discord. Folks pop in there as well. If at any point you discover any lost art or images that you can share or anything like that,
Oh, yeah.
either feel free to pop in or let me know, and I'll share. But yeah.
I just found the original illustration for the Vashir
Oh wow.
that is a Vashir girl wearing Firiona V's costume.
All
So
right.
one of the original EQ concept artist had moved on to another team by that time, and when he heard we were making cat people, he was like, "Oh, hmm." So he drew a cat girl wearing Firiona V's outfit and threw it over to us. And we were like, oh, well, we don't have any concept artists, but this is like the first piece of Vashir concept art back in the day. I found a photocopy of it in my garage like 2 days
Badass.
ago. Yeah. So yeah, I'm happy to throw that stuff together.
Cool, man. Who was that? Do you remember who?
It was oh, right, what is his name?
Was it?
Rick Schmidt.
Yeah. So
Rick Schmidt.
yep. So I just talked to him. He actually lives about an hour away from me in Germany, and he
Hmm.
moved to Germany about the same time I did, and we lived in the same town for. I was there for 2 years. Didn't know the entire time. So yeah, I'm gonna try to have him on soon as well if possible. So
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's the guy who concepted everything in EQ,
yeah, and
pretty
that
much.
that is why I reached out, man. Yeah. So this has been badass. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Right.
I'll follow up with you right after this on Discord, and yeah, I really appreciate you being on, dude.
Sounds good. Thanks, everybody.